Yields back. Judge, why wasn't it fixed last year?
Pardon me?
Why wasn't it fixed last year? I mean, the gentlelady talked about working in a bipartisan fashion to fix this problem. Why wasn't it fixed last year?
Why wasn't it fixed last year?
Yeah, you talked about the concerns and how we have to work together to fix it. I'm just wondering, why wasn't it fixed last year? Because they didn't need bipartisan support last year. Last Congress, they controlled everything in the federal government. If it's a federal government solution, why didn't they fix it?
Well, one of the things that we're doing today, and I appreciate that, is we're having a dialogue, and those dialogues.
I'm all for dialogue. I'm all for working together, but they didn't. Now it's all bipartisan. They had first of all, they say there's no problem on the border. The border's secure. Then they come in here and say, oh no, we got to work in a bipartisan way to fix it. Now that we're in control of the House of Representatives. But all I'm saying is, last Congress they controlled everything. Joe Biden's a Democrat in the White House. The Senate was controlled by the Democrats, and the House was controlled by the Democrats. Why didn't they fix it then?
I think that falls more in your corner than mine.
My corner?
Yes, because
in the minority last Congress?
Well, all we do is maintain the flow and try to do the best we can with a broken system. And we have nothing to do with fixing the system. And so,
but you understand how the United States government works, right? You get a majority in the House, a majority in the Senate. They pass something, it goes to the president, he signs it. They could have done that last Congress. They didn't.
Well, what a great opportunity for you.
Great opportunity, yeah. And that's why we're having the hearing.
Exactly.
So they criticized us on the hearing. They said, "Why are we starting this Congress off with this hearing?" So they can't have it every way, and they can't blame Republicans when they were in control. And you can come here and you can say, "Oh no, now it's time for bipartisanship." We welcome that. If we really want to address the problem that caused Mr. and Mrs. Dunn to lose their son. The problem that sheriff has talked to us about that has been so dramatically changed in the last couple years, that's what we want to address. I yield the remainder of my time to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
The gentleman for yielding and for his good questions. So the user knows when their account's been suspended or blocked, but they don't know when they have some of these gold terms that were under Mr. Bongino and Mr. Kirk. Is that right, Mr. Roth?
As of the time that I worked at Twitter, yes, that's correct.
So they don't know if they're on the search blacklist. They don't know if they're on the do not amplify. They don't know that.
That's correct. Twitter did not disclose that.
So you did that to these two accounts. What I want to know did you know, Mr. Roth, if that was at the prompting of anyone from the government?
Gentleman's time's expired, but please answer the question.
No, sir, I'm not aware of any requests or orders or demands or anything from the government requesting that visibility filtering be applied to those accounts or any others.
Chair recognizes Mr.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Roth, was there ever any visibility filtering that was hard-coded by Twitter employees into accounts of specific users?
Twitter employees were responsible for building the systems that performed visibility filtering, and then that filtering would have been applied either automatically.
I'm asking a very specific question. I'm asking, was the code written in a way that for certain accounts, those accounts, unique in and of themselves, would be visibility filtering, to use your term, so that they wouldn't have as much reach or as much influence?
The term hard coding suggests that it was permanent and immutable, and I wouldn't agree with that, no.
But it did happen, is what you're saying. There was hard-coded into some of these accounts of specific users by Twitter employees this ability to filter and limit the reach of that particular post, or that particular tweet, I should say.
Again, I wouldn't say that they were hard-coded.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Ms. Brown for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Comer.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Baker, Mr. Roth earlier said he thought it was a waste of time for the FBI to be sending you accounts that they thought violated Twitter's terms of services and Twitter's policy. I was just curious, did you ever tell Twitter executives or FBI acquaintances that the FBI had no legitimate interest in enforcement of Twitter's policy?
Sir, again, I'm going to give you the same answer I gave before. I think the advice that I was giving internally to folks would be covered by the attorney-client privilege, and as
let me
yes,
stop, Mr. Baker. Although you're testifying today by subpoena, you nonetheless have raised the attorney-client privilege to avoid answering this committee's question. Congress does not recognize the common law attorney-client privilege. With that, I'm going to allow Mr. Jordan to ask the question again.
Well, there's been two questions I've asked that he's refused to answer. So let me, if I could, Mr. Chairman, I'll ask both again. I'll go back to the one asked a couple minutes ago. top of page 2 of your testimony, you said, quote, "I did not destroy or improperly suppress any documents at Twitter regarding information important to the public dialogue." I would like to know what you're referring to that you, in your mind, properly suppressed, and when that took place, specifically if it took place during the time that the Twitter files were first being released just a few months ago.
Well, again, sir, as I think we've notified the committee and we've had these conversations with Twitter as well to try to resolve this issue prior to coming up here today, I don't have anything in writing that clears me in my ethical responsibilities to my former client with respect to answering questions that I think fall squarely within the attorney-client privilege. So unfortunately, I don't think I can go beyond what I've said there already, sir.
Unfortunately, Mr. Baker, your assertion that the attorney...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Roth, did the government tell you that the Biden laptop story was fake?
No, sir, they did not.
Did they tell you it was hacked?
No, sir, they did not.
On October 14, 2020, Twitter blocks the New York Post story on the Hunter Biden, the New York Post story on Hunter Biden, and suspends their account. The night before, FBI Special Agent Elvis Chan sends you an email. The email says this: "Heads up, I will be sending a teleporter link for you to download 10 documents. It's not spam. Please confirm receipt when you get it." 2 minutes later, 6:24 p.m., you respond back, "Received and downloaded, thanks." What were those 10 documents?
Twitter didn't give me access to my laptop, but Special Agent Chan has said publicly, and the FBI has confirmed, that those documents did not relate to Hunter Biden, and that's my recollection of them.
What did they relate to?
My interactions with Agent Chan and with the FBI almost entirely focused on what the FBI called malign foreign interference, things like Russian troll farms and Iranian involvement in the elections, not on any type of domestic
Any of the
activity.
information on there classified?
No, sir, I do not hold a security clearance, and so I would not have received any classified information.
Who does hold a security clearance? I'll just go to the second email here. I'm just curious about this. What I propose is that 30 days out from the election, this is another email to you from Mr. Chan. 30 days, we get temporary clearances. You pick who they are. Who were the people at Twitter who had a security clearance?
To be honest, sir, I'm not sure, and we never ultimately followed through on this plan to get temporary clearances.
Did anyone at Twitter have a security clearance?
It's my understanding that at least some current or former employees did hold clearances, but I wasn't certain about that.
Ms. Gaddy, do you know if anyone took up Mr. Chan's offer to hand out security clearances 30 days before the 2020 election?
Not that I'm aware.
So we don't know how many people had security clearances. Twitter, do we know? Mr. Baker, Mr. Gaddy, Ms. Gaddy, anyone know how many people at Twitter had a security clearance in the 30 days prior to the election?
I don't know the answer to that question, sir.
Ms. Gaddy?
I do not know.
Mr. Roth, you don't know?
No, sir.
Well, how about the last one? Ms. Navaroli, do you know?
No.
I mean, it seemed like the offer was to sort of just hand them out like candy. I just wondered who had them. No one knows? Okay. So the FBI didn't tell you that it was fake, didn't tell you that it was hacked. And Mr. Roth, did the story violate your policies?
In my judgment at the time, no, it did not.
Yeah, that's what you said. Said what I would propose, is you said, it isn't clearly a violation of our hack materials policy, nor is it clearly a violation of anything else. So I think what a lot of people are wondering is if it didn't violate your policies, and they didn't tell you it was fake, didn't tell you it was hacked, why'd you take it down?
The company made a decision that found that it did violate the policy. It wasn't my personal judgment at the time that it did, but the decision was communicated to me by my direct supervisor, and ultimately, I didn't disagree with it enough to object to
You know what I think happened, Mr. Roth? I think you guys got played. I think you guys wanted to take it deep down. We saw what the chairman put up where you said, everyone in the White House is a fascist. I think you guys wanted it to be taken down. I think you meet with these guys every week. We know that's been established in the Twitter files. You had weekly meetings with Mr. Chan in the run-up to the election. They send you all kinds of emails. They send you documents on the super secret James Bond teleporter. You get information on that. I think you guys wanted to take it down. I think you guys got played by the FBI. And that's the scary part. Because we had 50, this to me is the real takeaway. 51 former intelligence officials 5 days after you guys take down the Hunter Biden story and block the New York Post account. 5 days later, 51 former intel officials send a letter and they say, the Hunter Biden story has all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. The information operation was run on you guys, and then by extension run on the American people. And that's the concern. And to Mr. Raskin's point that you guys aren't bound by the First Amendment because you're a private company, okay, maybe so, but your terms of service don't have to comply with the First Amendment. Would that be right, Mr. Roth? They don't have to. You've said that as much in your testimony.
My understanding of the First Amendment is that it protects people and businesses from government, not informs how the...
In your terms of service. So here's what I want to know. Here's what I want to know. Is this a violation of the First Amendment when the government, Mr. Chan, again, sending you an email saying, we think these accounts need to be looked at because they violate your terms of service? That's a different standard. So you got the government saying your terms of service, which don't have to comply with the First Amendment, but the government saying we don't think these accounts comply with your terms of service, please take them down. You see a problem there, Mr. Roth?
Mr. Chairman, I'm seeing a flashing red light. I'm happy to answer the question. Do I think that that's a valuable use of the FBI's time? No, but I don't see in a request for review a problem under the First Amendment, no.
I sure do. I thank the gentleman. I get back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Conley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Recognize Mr. Conley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good.
My, what happens when you hold a hearing and you can't prove your point? We heard from the chairman in his opening statement that it's wrong for government to call Twitter and say, take down a tweet. Did I hear that correct, Mr. Roth?
That was my understanding, yes.
Yeah. So on May 27th, 2020, President Donald J. Trump tweeted, and I quote, Republicans feel that social media platforms totally silence conservatives. By the way, something that would come as news to you, apparently, Mr. Roth, because you're still the subject of conservative harassment. We will strongly regulate, he went on to say, or close them down before we ever allow this to happen, unquote. Ms. Navaroli, doesn't that sound eerily like a government official telling Twitter that there's a threat, we'll shut you down if we don't like the content?
I am not familiar with the tweet that you have referenced.
Well, but if I just told you that quote without telling you who said it, might it have some ominous overtones from your point of view if you're still at Twitter? We'll shut you down. We'll regulate you. We will never allow this to happen. Those are pretty strong words.
They are.
Yeah. Okay. On September 8th, 2019, at 11:11 p.m., Donald Trump heckled two celebrities on Twitter, John Legend and his wife, Chrissy Teigen, and referred to them as the musician John Legend and his filthy-mouthed wife, unquote. Ms. Teigen responded to that email at 12:17 a.m., and according to notes from a conversation with you, Ms. Navaroli's counsel, your counsel, the White House almost immediately thereafter contacted Twitter to demand the tweet be taken down. Is that accurate?
Thank you for the question. In my role, I was not responsible for receiving any sort of request from the government. However, what I was privy to was my supervisors letting us know that we had received something along those lines or something of a request. In that particular instance, I do remember hearing that we had received a request from the White House to make sure that we evaluated this tweet and that they wanted it to come down because it was a derogatory statement directed towards the president.
They wanted it to come down. They made that request.
To my recollection, yes.
I thought that was an inappropriate action by a government official, let alone the White House. But it wasn't Joe Biden about his son's laptop. It was Donald Trump because he didn't like what Chrissy Teigen had to say about him. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
My. You ever think it's appropriate for the President of the United States to direct or otherwise influence a social media company to take down its content?
I think it's a very slippery slope.
Mr. Roth, Ms. Gaddy, Mr. Baker, any evidence that Joe Biden's ever done that?
Certainly none that I'm aware of, no.
I don't recall anything like that.
I'm sorry, that President Biden did what, sir?
Has Joe Biden ever called Twitter, to your knowledge, or his White House at his behest, to take down content or urge you to take down content?
I don't know the answer to that question, sir.
Well, I'm going to have to conclude, at least from 3 of the 4, you don't know. There's no evidence he's ever done that, but there's plenty of evidence Donald J. Trump tried to do that. And if we're going to have a hearing about the misuse of social media and the intrusion of government in the content on social media, we've got an environment-rich target, but it's not Joe Biden. It's Donald J. Trump, and of course, we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about Russian bots and Russian fabrications using fake accounts on Twitter to a political purpose, and it's not to help elect Democrats. And we don't want to talk about 4 years of Donald Trump manipulating the truth and trying to manipulate social media and threaten it, or directly to try to shape it by taking down content because it was critical of him personally. And that's what we ought to be talking about as we move forward, not the subject of today's hearing. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Donalds for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, Mr. Roth.
Just 20 seconds. I'll maybe pose a quick question to Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams, the opening statement, there's been a lot of talk about the memorandum from Attorney General Garland on October 21st, 2021. The opening statement, he says, the very first sentence, in recent months, there's been a disturbing spike in harassment, intimidation, threats of violence against school administrators. And when he testified on October 21st, 2021, we asked him, what was the basis, what was the evidence for that statement? Do you remember what the Attorney General said?
Sir, I don't. I don't work for the Justice Department anymore. Didn't advise him on it.
Well, I'll remind you. He said it was the letter from the National School Boards Association. Now, do you happen to know what the National School Boards Association did with their letter, what they said about their letter after the Attorney General testified?
Sir, I do not.
They rescinded it. They said, we regret and apologize for the letter. So the basis for the targeting action involving the federal government and local school board matters, local law enforcement matters, the basis was the letter. That's what the Attorney General cited, and that letter has been pulled back, and the association who sent that letter said, we apologize and regret that we sent it. Seems to me the Attorney General should rescind his memorandum, which we've called for now for a year and a half.
Thank the Chairman. Look forward, the Democrats tell us. Focus on the future. Might have started in a lab, might have happened in nature. But here's the question I keep coming up with. If it may have been a lab, may have been nature, we're supposed to look forward, then why did Dr. Fauci work so hard for just one of those theories? Why was it so important to push one over the other? Dr. Barrett said, oh, we should entertain all hypotheses. Dr. Fauci had his hypothesis, how this started. We should entertain all of them. But that's not what happened. That is definitely not what happened. 3 years ago, if you thought it came from a lab, if you raised that, you were called a nut job. You got censored on Twitter. You were blacklisted on Twitter. You were even called a crackpot by the very scientist who in late January sent emails to Dr. Fauci and said it came from a lab. They called you crackpot. Is that right, Dr. Redfield?
I think the most upsetting thing to me was the Baltimore Sun calling me a racist because I said this came from a Wuhan lab.
Dr. Redfield, you ran the CDC and you were on the coronavirus task force. Is that right?
Correct.
That was formed on January 29th, 2020. Is that right?
Correct.
2 days later, Dr. Fauci gets an email from Dr. Anderson which says what? Virus looks engineered, virus not consistent with evolutionary theory. Is that accurate?
That's my understanding.
Next day, I know, did he share that email with you, by the way, Dr. Redfield?
No.
As a member of the task force, as the head of CDC, did he share that email with you?
No.
Okay, next day, February 1st, Dr. Gary sends Dr. Fauci another email. That email says, I don't know how this happens in nature, but it would be easy to do in a lab. Did he share that email with you, Dr. Redfield?
No.
You didn't see either one of those emails, even though you're head of CDC, even though you're on the coronavirus task force that had been formed just 3 days earlier.
No.
3 days later, Dr. Anderson and Dr. Gary, who told us it came from a lab in emails to Dr. Fauci that Dr. Fauci wouldn't let Dr. Redfield see, 3 days later, they changed their position 180 degrees. The question is why?
Mr. Wade, why would they change their position that fast when the only intervening event is a conference call with Dr. Fauci, the guy who wouldn't let Dr. Redfield see the very emails that they had sent him, Dr. Redfield, head of CDC on the coronavirus task force? Why would they change their position, Dr. Wade, or Mr. Wade?
Well, this question does lie at the heart of the issue. What is pertinent, it seems to me, is there's no new scientific evidence that we can see that became available between these dates, the January 31st and Feb 4.
Right. There's no new. I think you're. Go ahead.
So you have to ask if there were other kinds of influence available. Now, it is true that Dr. Fauci and Dr. Farry in London were very powerful research officials, and between them they controlled.
I read your testimony. I saw that. Yeah.
So
why don't you cut to the chase and tell them what you really think was the reason?
I don't know what the reason was.
I know what it was.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll let you say it because I read your testimony. I think you said it in your testimony too. Maybe you're reluctant to say it here, but go ahead.
Well, if you're looking at the timeline on May 21st, just a few weeks after the Nature Medicine article had come out, two of the signatories of the original email to Dr. Fauci, that's Dr. Anderson and Dr. Gary, were awarded a $9 million grant for the.
So there's 9 million reasons why they changed their mind. I knew you'd get to it. I read that last night. 3 months after. So 3 days after they say it came from a lab, they changed their position, and the only intervening event's a conference call with Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins. Again, a call that Mr. Redfield was not allowed to be on, the head of CDC and on the coronavirus task force. And then 3 months later, shazam, they get $9 million from Dr. Fauci. Well, isn't that something? Isn't that something? That's why we want to talk to these guys. That's why Chairman Winstrup wants to bring in Dr. Anderson and Dr. Gary and ask them a series of questions so we can get to the bottom of this, so we can move forward and deal with this. Now, here's the key question. Look, I'm just a common sense guy from Ohio. I majored in wrestling in college, but I got a degree in economics. You're supposed to get a degree when you go to college. I got one in economics, and one of the things they tell you about is a thing called opportunity cost. So when you're spending your time making sure that the country believes only one of these theories, you could have been doing what Dr. Redfield was doing in our government, trying to figure out how we deal with this virus. And what was Dr. Fauci doing? He was trying to cover his backside, and everybody knows it. And that's the part that ticks us off, because this is the highest paid guy in our government getting all kinds of money to tell us things that were not accurate, because we now know U.S. tax dollars went to a lab in China, a lab that was not up to code, a lab that was doing gain-of-function research, and that's where this thing most definitely came from. And Dr. Fauci had to prove, no, he can't have that news getting out. And that's why he did what he did, to the exclusion of a brilliant guy running our CDC, kept him out of the loop. Keeping him out of the loop probably potentially could have harmed America. That's the thing that ticks us all off. And that's why, Mr. Chairman, this hearing is so darn important, and we get to the bottom of really what happened. I yield back. Mr. Schellenberg, I want to go to Twitter Files Part 7. I related a lot of what you put in there in my opening statement. And I want to give you as much time as you want, because I'm going to read the very first sentence, because something jumped out at me when I read the first sentence. In Twitter Files number 7, the FBI and the Biden laptop. You say this: how the FBI and intelligence community discredited factual information about the Biden foreign business dealings both after and before the New York Post revealed the contents of his laptop on October 14th, 2020. And what kind of jumped out at me was the way you framed it, because you did it backwards from what it's normally said. Normally you would say, the sentence would read, foreign business dealings both before and after. But I assume you did that for a reason, because in fact, I think the next sentence, you say social media companies discredit leaked information about Hunter Biden before and after. You use the normal, customary way in the second sentence, but the first sentence strikes me as you were trying to emphasize the before component of that statement. And I want you to just walk us through why you said that, because when I read it, it certainly was an operation both before and after, as you said, after and before.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Reading through the whole sweep of events, I do not know the extent to which the influence operation aimed at pre-bunking the Hunter Biden laptop was coordinated. I don't know who all was involved, but what we saw was you saw Aspen and Stanford many months before then saying, don't cover the material in the hack and leak without emphasizing the fact that it could be disinformation. Okay, so they're priming journalists to not cover a future hack and leak in the way that journalists have long been trained to, with in the tradition of the Pentagon Papers, made famous by the Steven Spielberg movie. They were saying, cover the fact that it probably came from the Russians. Then you have the former general counsel to the FBI, Jim Baker, the former deputy chief of staff to the FBI, both arriving at Twitter in the summer of 2020, which I find what an interesting coincidence. Then when the New York Post publishes its first article on October 14th, it's Jim Baker who makes the most strenuous argument within Twitter. Multiple emails, multiple messages saying this doesn't look real. There's intelligence experts saying that this could be Russian disinformation. He is the most strenuous person inside Twitter arguing that it's probably Russian disinformation. The internal evaluation by Yoel Roth, who testified in front of this committee, was that it was what it looked to be, which was that it was not a result of a hack and leak operation. And why did he think that? Because the New York Post had published the FBI subpoena taking the laptop in December of 2019, and they published the agreement that the computer store owner had with Hunter Biden that gave him permission after he abandoned the laptop to use it however he wanted. So there really wasn't much doubt about the provenance of that laptop. But you had Jim Baker making a strenuous argument, and then of course you get to a few days after the October 14th release, you have the President of the United States echoing what these former intelligence community officials were saying, which is that it looked like a Russian influence operation. Yeah. So they were claiming that the laptop was made public by a conspiracy theory, and the conspiracy theory that somehow the Russians got it, and they convinced Yoel Roth that they convinced him of this wild hack and leak story, that somehow the Russians stole it, got the information, gave it to the computer store, and it was bizarre. So you read that chain of events, and it appears as though there is an organized influence operation to pre-bunk.
Why? Why do you think they could predict the time, the method, and the person? Why could the FBI predict it? Not only did they predict it, they predicted it, so did the Aspen Institute. Yeah. Seemed like everyone was in the know saying, here's what's going to happen, we can read the future. How do you think they were able to do that?
I think the most important fact to know is that the FBI had that laptop in December 2019. They were also spying on Rudy Giuliani when he got the laptop and when he gave it to the New York Post. Now, maybe the FBI agents who were going to Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook and to Twitter executives and warning of a hack and leak, potentially involving Hunter Biden, maybe those guys didn't have anything to do with the guys that had the laptop. We don't know that. I know. But I have to say, as a newcomer to this, as somebody that thought it was Russian disinformation in 2020, everybody I knew thought it was Russian, I was shocked to see that series of events going on. It looked to me like a deliberate influence operation. I don't have the proof of it, but the circumstantial evidence is pretty disturbing.
It's pretty overwhelming. Thank you, Mr. Schellenberg. Now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman, for 5 minutes. Last week in the full Judiciary Committee hearing, I introduced into the record a story of a left-wing journalist who said that talked about the FBI putting a paid informant, a felon, in the Black Lives Matter movement in Denver. I want to focus on the First Amendment, just like protecting the First Amendment, just like these guys
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Are you going to respond after every?
No, I'm taking my 5 minutes.
This is
your.
it's your 5 minutes now.
I can take my 5 minutes when I want to, and I'm taking my 5 minutes.
Okay, great.
Now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I would ask for an additional few seconds for being interrupted by the ranking member. But the truth is, we want to focus on protecting the First Amendment. Mr. Schellenberg, are you a Republican?
No, I'm not.
You got any pro-Trump bumper stickers on your car?
I voted for Biden.
Voted for Biden. You don't have any MAGA hats laying around your house, right?
I do not.
Yeah, but you said earlier, both you and Mr. Taibbi said this is the most chilling thing you've ever seen as journalists. Mr. Taibbi, the same thing. You're not a Republican either, right?
No, I'm not.
You didn't vote for. I mean, like, this is about protecting the First Amendment. Mr. Taibbi, I want to read from your Twitter file number 9. You say this: after weeks of Twitter files, the Bureau issued a statement Wednesday, referring to the FBI. Here's what the FBI said: it is unfortunate that conspiracy theorists and others are feeding the American public misinformation with the sole purpose of attempting to discredit the agency. You then follow up, and this is why I think you're an award-winning author, you then follow up, they must think we're unambitious if our sole aim is to discredit the FBI. After all, a whole range of government agencies discredit themselves in the Twitter files. And then you go on to, in this particular Twitter file, to talk about what Mr. Bishop was just talking about, the GEC at the State Department. You talk about the CIA. You talk about the DOD. You talk about the FBI. You talk about the DHS. You talk about the Foreign Intelligence Task Force, which is a combination of all these. But there was one agency you didn't mention because you didn't know at the time. One agency, you got almost the whole alphabet, but you didn't mention one agency, the FTC. Because you know about them now.
Yes, we do.
You know about them now in an up-close and personal way. You didn't know then, but you do know now. December 2nd, as I said earlier, December 2nd, the first Twitter file comes out, Mr. Taibbi. And I think there are 5 others, including the ones from Mr. Schellenberger. December 13th, the very first letter that the FTC sends to Twitter after the Twitter files, 11 days after the first Twitter file. There have been 5 of them come out. The FTC's first demand in that first letter after the Twitter files come out is identify all journalists, I'm quoting, identify all journalists and other members of the media to whom Twitter worked with. You find that scary, Mr. Taibbi, that you got a federal government agency asking a private company, who in the press are you talking with?
Yeah, I do find it scary. I think it's none of the government's business which journalists a private company talks to and why. I think every journalist should be concerned about that, and the absence of interest in that issue by my fellow colleagues in the mainstream media is an indication of how low the business has sunk. There was once a real esprit de corps and camaraderie within media. Whenever one of us was gone after, we all kind of rose to the challenge and supported.
Used to be.
Yeah,
used to be the case.
That is gone now. We don't protect one another.
You know what else used to happen? Democrats used to care about protecting First Amendment free speech rights, too. Now it's like, okay, if you're attacking, and I said this on the House floor, I said, don't think they won't come for you. Oh, the big tech, big media, cancel culture, they may come for Republicans and conservatives now, but the mob is never satisfied. They will keep coming. Mr. Schellenberger, you know who the chair of the FTC is?
Not personally.
Lena Khan. Lena Khan. You know who she used to work for?
My understanding is the Judiciary Committee?
Yeah, she's worked for these folks. These same folks have been attacking you today. Same folks. Chair of the FTC. Worked for them. Here's what they said. Here's what she said in a letter where they ask about who these journalists... Again, they named 4 journalists by name. You were 2 of the 4. As I said before, I think it's frankly courageous and brave of you to show up today when you know the federal government's got an eye on you personally. Here's what they asked for in that letter. Any credentialing or background check Twitter has done on journalists. Now think about that. The federal government is saying, we want you to do a background check on members of the press. Freedom of the press mentioned in the First Amendment, and they're doing they want Twitter to do a background check on you before they can talk to you in America? The FTC, led by Lena Khan, who used to work for these guys, is asking that question. Now we know. Now we all know why. You guys said at the outset, this is the most chilling story. And you guys are New York Times bestsellers, award-winning journalists. But in all your time in the journalism field, this issue, most important. And how this, I think, what'd you call it, Mr. Schellenberg, this complex, what'd you call it, the
censorship industrial complex.
Totally, this web of censorship, big government, big tech, NGOs, all this web of censorship that Mr. Bishop was getting into in his line of questioning. That's what this committee is going to get to. And that's not right or left. This is just right or wrong. This is wrong. We know it's wrong, and it's about protecting the first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wilcox, did you or anyone in your organization communicate with the ATF or the Biden administration about these issues we are discussing today prior to the notice of proposed rulemaking?
We submitted formal petitions for rulemaking through the appropriate channels, sir.
Before the notice of proposed rulemaking?
That's correct.
So you were in communication with the Biden administration wanting to make these changes?
We filed formal petitions for rulemaking through the appropriate channels.
Who'd you talk to?
It was a written submission, sir.
Did you speak to anyone personally?
I didn't.
Did anyone in your organization talk to anyone?
I'd have to check, but I believe we submitted the written submission as a formal submission.
People in your organization may have talked to folks at the ATF prior to the notice of proposed rulemaking?
Not that I'm aware.
Did anyone in your organization talk to Mr. Dettelbach before the notice of proposed rulemaking?
I don't believe Mr. Dettelbach had
You came in afterward.
nominated.
Have anyone talked to Mr. Dettelbach about this personally?
Of course, we've been in communication with the ATF in this administration and in prior administrations.
Talking to the director? You've talked to the director?
I mean, we work with ATF across administrations.
Have you talked to the director? It's a simple question.
Yeah, I've communicated with the director.
You've talked to Mr. Dettelbach?
Of course.
Yeah, and well, I find that interesting. I just know, as we're speaking upstairs, the president of the National School Board Association is sitting for a transcribed interview because the same thing happened there. National School Boards Association talked with the Biden White House, the Biden Justice Department, the Biden Department of Education, concocted this letter that set in motion this whole attack on parents showing up at school boards. And it looks to me like we have a similar operation going on here, where you guys worked with the ATF to change something that had been the law for 10 years to go after law-abiding Second Amendment Americans. Second Amendment supporting Americans. Mr. Bosco, you invented this stabilizing brace, is that right?
That's correct.
And you invented it for a Marine buddy, a friend of yours who served our country and was injured?
That's correct.
And you were told 10 years ago that the stabilizing brace does not convert a pistol into a short-barreled rifle. Is that right?
That is correct.
I got the letter right here from the ATF, November 26, 2012, right? And then 7 weeks ago, a 180-degree change, right? 180-degree change, just the opposite. They now say it is just the opposite of what they told you 10 years ago.
That's
Again, I know others have talked about this, but I think it's so clear. 180-degree change. So in 10 years and 2 months, the rule was one way, and you developed a business based on the rule that they told you. Your government told you this was fine, and now they've changed it.
That's correct.
When did the bill pass that changed the law?
There was no bill.
No bill. That's the fundamental issue, right? No bill. Mr. Dettelbach, the new director, he never ran for Congress. I don't think he was ever, I don't remember a bill going through Mr. Nadler's committee last Congress that changed the law. I would have known because I'm on that committee, the Judiciary Committee, which has jurisdiction over this stuff. I would have known. I don't remember a bill passing the full Congress. I don't remember a bill in the Senate Judiciary Committee passing or going through the Senate. And I certainly don't remember a bill going to President Biden's desk that he's signing the legislation that changed the rule. But this could potentially impact millions of Americans, law-abiding, Second Amendment-supporting Americans. Is that right, Mr. Bosco?
That's absolutely correct.
How many products have you sold, just your company alone, to Americans? How many stabilizing braces have you sold?
Many millions. I can say that from 2020 to today, which are the years that the ATF didn't concern itself with when it did its impact study, we sold, our company alone, 2.3 million braces.
So while they were doing their study, they didn't count the number of braces that were being sold?
They didn't count in their impact study.
That's probably because Mr. Wilcox's organization told them not to count it, right?
I don't want to.
Well, they were talking to him all the time, it sounds like, putting this all together, going after people who support the Second Amendment. How many Americans do you think it's total? So I've heard estimates as many as 40 million Americans could be impacted by this?
Correct. Congressional Research Services has said anywhere between 10 and 40 million Americans own stabilizing braces.
Unless you remove the brace, lengthen the barrel, turn in or destroy your firearm or register your gun with this government that you know you can trust because Mr. Wilcox has been working with them, you know you can trust. Unless you do those 4 things, what happens? What are you?
A felon.
A felon. A felon for something 10 years ago they said was just fine, that you built a business on, and the business started because you wanted to help a man who put the uniform of his country on his back and served our country and was injured, and now they're going to put you out of business and make people felons. But don't worry, every town USA, Mr. Wilcox has been working with our government to implement this, to target Second Amendment people, Americans who support the Second Amendment. Such a deal. Such a deal. That's why we need legislation to say this rule does, we need to pass that. That's what we do need to pass into law now based on what has happened with this organization. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Ms. Johnson, in your written remarks, you said that the Penn Center has a steadfast devotion to free expression. In fact, I counted 16 times in your written testimony you used the terms free expression or free speech. I just want to know, 2 weeks ago when Senator Schumer stood on the Senate floor and said to a major American news outlet that they should not play video footage from January 6th, was that something that's consistent with a steadfast devotion to free expression?
I'm sorry, sir. When Senator Schumer
told Fox News, don't play video footage from January 6th, was that a commitment to steadfast devotion to free expression?
I think I cannot speak for Senator Schumer or what he intended.
Not asked you to speak for him. I'm asking you to comment on what he said.
if there is an issue of national security, sir, I'm not going to comment on what.
How about the very next day when this committee released a report where the Federal Trade Commission sent a letter to a private company, Twitter, and asked them, who are the journalists you're talking with, and named 4 journalists by name? Would that be consistent with a steadfast devotion to free expression?
Sir, PEN America consistently works to defend the rights of journalists, including their ability to do their job. That's all I will say about that.
The next day, 2 of those 4 journalists mentioned in the FTC's letter to Twitter testified in front of this committee, and Democrat members of Congress asked those 2 journalists who their sources were. Is that consistent with a steadfast devotion to free expression?
Sir, PEN America consistently works to ensure that journalists can do their job, and that means allowing for anonymous sources as appropriate.
Good for you. How about this? 2 days into the Biden administration, literally 2 days, January 23rd, 2021, Clark Humphrey, Executive Office of the Presidency, White House office, sends an email to Twitter where he says this: wanted to flag the below tweet, and I'm wondering if we can get moving on the process for having it removed ASAP. Would that be consistent with a steadfast devotion to free expression?
Sir, I don't have the content of the tweet, so I can't speak to that.
I'll give you the content. They cited a tweet from Robert F. Kennedy, that conservative Republican, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., where he was raising some concerns about vaccines. And the White House, 2 days into this administration, said they wanted that tweet taken down. Would that be consistent with free expression?
I will say 2 things about that. One is that, not having seen this, and I appreciate you reading it to me. One is that we would like to err on the side of permitting content, so that because I think it's important to have content.
I'm with you. I'm with you. That's why.
And I think the other, sir, is that we would also want to ensure that if there is misinformation or disinformation being promulgated, that we're able to address it.
Well, that's when it gets scary. That's when it gets real scary. I'm surprised you said that after mentioning free expression 16 times in your written statement, that suddenly now, unless it's misinformation as defined by you, that is entirely contrary to what the First Amendment's about. How about this? National School Boards Association letter that was the catalyst for most of this, frankly all of this, I think, was sent on September 29, 2021. I just want to read the first sentence. America's public schools and education leaders are under immediate threat. The letter then goes on to say, the NSBA requests a joint expedited review by the Department of Justice. Such review should examine the use of the Patriot Acts in regard to domestic terrorism. Do you agree with the NSBA letter sent on September 29, 2021?
Sir, we are not, PEN America has not made a position on that letter. I will just say I understand.
No, I'm just asking, well, how about those 2 sentences I just read? Do you agree with the tone of that in that letter? Do you agree with that?
I'll say this, it is really important that any member of a community is able to stand up before a school board and voice their opinion. It is equally important that a school board member is able to carry out this critical, important public service, sir, in a way that keeps our safety. That's really what I always.
Well, you know who disagrees with it?
Who disagrees with me, sir?
All kinds of people, but the most important, I think, entity who disagrees with it is the School Boards Association themselves, because 23 days later, they rescinded it. 23 days later, they said this: we regret and apologize for the letter. There was no justification for the language included in the letter. So, I mean, the idea that the Attorney General still continues to defend his memorandum based solely on this, as Ms. Neely pointed out in her opening statement, I find alarming. And to our 3 witnesses, Ms. Justice, Mr. Langford, and Ms. Neely, thank you so much for what you did. To your point earlier, Ms. Neely, we are going to talk to these people. We talked to Ms. Garcia today. We had a transcribed interview with her. Mr. Slavin's coming in next week. We're trying to talk with Ms. Wall and a host of other folks who concocted this whole thing, as our report that we released 2 days ago points out, concocted this whole thing. And the key line in that report, not from Republicans, not from Mr. Johnson, not from Republicans on the committee, but from a U.S. attorney, Democrat U.S. attorney in the Biden administration, when he said this appeared to be a manufactured crisis. It was all put together for politics, and that's what we all know. With that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
When I think of education,
Chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Holden, you were born in New York City?
Yes.
You were raised in New York City, went to grade school and high school here in the city?
Yep.
Went to college in New York City. You got,
Yes.
I think I looked. You got an associate degree, an undergrad degree, postgrad degree, all from universities here in New York City. Is that right?
Yes, I did, Chair.
You're a professor at a university here in New York City.
Right, 44 years.
All your professional career has been spent here in New York City. Is that right?
Yes.
And you received a Lifetime Achievement Award for your volunteer work from the Queen Civic Group. Is that right? For your
yes.
work here in the city.
Yes.
You love this town, don't you?
I love it.
I mean, I think Mr. Gates is right. I think America loves this town.
Right.
Whether you're a Yankees fan, a Mets fan, a Giants fan, a Jets fan, the Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, Broadway, Wall Street. Americans love this city. Maybe most, I think, Americans appreciate the people of this town and the example they showed the country after that tragic day of 9/11. Do you agree with all that, Mr. Holden?
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. But right now, the policies being implemented by this district attorney are going to ruin this great city. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
It's scary, isn't it? Scary what you see. It's scary what Ms. Harrison's had to endure, what Mr. Albus had to endure, what Ms. Brames had to endure, and what Mr. Borgen has had to endure. And it's driven by that day one memo. That day one memo which sent a message to this town, to the bad guys in this town, you can do bad things and you're not going to get prosecuted. Do you agree with all that, Mr. Holden?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, it's scary. Soft on crime policies are going to ruin this great city, and that's why we're here. It's happened in other cities, as Mr. Gates pointed out. That's why this is not the only hearing. We're going to have other hearings. We'll go to wherever we need to go. But this is something that has to happen, has to stop. Justice isn't supposed to be political. Now, Mr. Holden, you're a Democrat, right?
Yes, I am.
But it shouldn't matter. Republican or Democrat, I think as a lot of people said, it should not matter, should it? What's the answer, Mr. Holden? What would you recommend?
My allegiance is to my constituents. I live
Well
here. For
said.
71 years, I've lived in New York City. I've seen bad times, high crime, 2,000 murders a year in the 80s. I've not seen the lawlessness that I'm seeing today in New York City in my lifetime. That means we're afraid to go anywhere.
Let me just be clear. So in 71 years, your life here in this great city, it's never been as bad as it is today.
And I've had so many friends leaving this town because they just see the quality of life dropping. They go out on the street, there's people driving down the wrong way with electric scooters, there's people robbing stores. You know that all the pharmacies in New York City have to be under lock and key. You have to go in a case. It's so bad, these small crimes, that Mr. Bragg has said he's not going to prosecute. You don't send that message out there. And that's why we disagree. We're the same party, but we totally disagree on that. Again, my allegiance is not to the party. It's to my constituents and where I live. And again, I plan to live here, until I die. But I don't want to see it go down the drain.
Yeah. You're standing up for the folks you get to represent in Queens as part of the city council. Mr. Borgen, Ms. Fisher earlier said bad guys go into other states and buy guns illegally, and the Democrats' response is take away guns from law-abiding citizens. Is that going to work, Mr. Borgen?
Absolutely not. I just want to say one thing. I sit here and listen. You're on one side, you're on one side. When Ronald Reagan was president, him and Tip O'Neill had regular meetings, got together and worked together in Congress.
That's right.
I don't understand why I have to sit here, whether Republican or Democrat. I'm a Republican, by the way. I now vote in Florida, and I'm a registered voter in Florida. I have a Florida driver's license. Based on, I'm not planning to stay here, but the fact of the matter is, if everybody would work together and not sit here and say, this party says this about Trump, about this, it doesn't make any sense. But the fact of the matter is, the criminals will get guns either way. You can do whatever you want. The criminals are going to get guns. They always have gotten guns. It's not going to change. It's not going to change. So you can sit here till your face blue in the face. You can say Congress are going to outlaw gun sales across America. They're going to get guns.
Yep.
The criminals will get guns. And there's nothing you can do about it. That's life. And Mr. Kessler sits here and says, we have to sit and take it. I never heard someone say to me, you have to take crime. I live in Long Island. Crime has now come to my area, out in the 5 towns, in a very nice suburban area. We have had robberies now in stores, and now the crime is coming toward me because I guess New York City's tapped out. They can't rob the pharmacies anymore. But they're going to get guns, nothing you can do about it, absolutely nothing.
Bad guys aren't necessarily stupid, they're just bad. They're going to figure out a way to do bad things. And the key is to put bad guys behind bars so they can't harm others. And when you send that message, things get better.
There's a segment of society, they're always going to be criminals. It's been from day one. Nothing you can do about it. But if Mr. Bragg would lock people up, Would save a lot of headaches in New York City and save lives.
Thank you, Mr. Borgen. Gentlemen, the chair now recognizes. Well, I was just going to say, Ms. Harrison, are you grandstanding?
No, and it seems like, you know, as Madeline mentioned, the other side is here on taxpayer dollars. The least that they could do is listen to our side of it, ask us questions. They've brought witnesses in to counter our horrific stories for their agenda. All they want to do is talk about gun legislation. Well, you can have all the gun legislation on the books, but if it's not enforced, which is what Alvin Bragg is doing, then it's not going to matter and people are going to die. And that's why we're here. And I appreciate your oversight because we do need help. And if they continue to ignore it, people are going to continue to die.
Is this committee victimizing you, Ms. Brame, as Democrats said?
Absolutely not. This committee has given me a platform, has given me a seat at the table to be able to tell my story and raise awareness for victims all over, not just New York City, but all over this country, especially from Philadelphia.
Ms. Fisher, if the guns are the problem, why didn't the Democrats fix it?
The Democrats have worked hard to pass.
Well, they had control. They controlled all the House, all the Senate. They still have the White House. Why didn't they fix it last Congress?
We need comprehensive gun violence prevention legislation to be passed, and this Congress has the ability and the capacity to do that.
I was in the Congress last session. Mr. Nader was the
can
chair.
do it
They
now.
tried. They could have passed. They didn't pass
We
it.
need Congress to go back to Washington and pass strong gun violence prevention legislation.
No, I'm going to go to Mr. DiGiacomo. Mr. DiGiacomo, are you grandstanding?
Not at all. You know, honestly, I'm
You're here
here
representing the detectives of this great town, right?
Absolutely, and very proud of it. I am not here other than to ask for help. Someone just said that we can't do anything here. Well, if the people of the United States Congress can't do anything to help us, we're in a lot of trouble because there are some powerful people around this table that could help and stop the violence and make the streets safer for the people of New York City and the police officers and detectives that serve them.
Thank you.
We're here for help.
Thank
we
you.
need help.
I thank the gentleman from Texas, and the gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank all of the witnesses for being here today.
Will the gentlelady yield for a moment?
Yes, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you. I just want to answer Mr. Jordan's question. Last year, when we were in control, the Democrats in the House passed very comprehensive gun control legislation. The Democrats in the Senate voted for very comprehensive gun control legislation, but because of the filibuster, you needed 60 votes, and we got no Republican votes, and that's why it didn't pass. I thank the gentlelady. I yield back.
I echo the statistics that were just offered by the ranking member, Mr. Nadler.
And you remember when you said this in February, this is before you made these statements, which I think are not being square with the American people. You said vaccination of teachers is not a prerequisite for safely reopening schools. Did you make that statement?
Something to that effect. I can't exactly say the quote, but yeah.
Vaccinations of teachers is not a prerequisite for safely reopening schools. I think you made that statement on February 3rd. Do you stand by that statement?
At the time, yeah. We had a week later or 10 days later, we had an operational guidance that demonstrated layered mitigation strategies and that you could safely reopen.
Were you speaking as Dr. Walensky, or were you speaking as Dr. Walensky, head of the CDC?
I have said that while I've been in front of Congress and the media and press conferences, during my tenure as CDC director, I've been speaking as the CDC director.
But that's not what the White House said, right? Jen Psaki said Dr. Walensky spoke to this in her personal capacity. Do you remember that statement?
I do.
Who's right? Jen Psaki or you?
Well, I will tell you that I was speaking in my role as the CDC director.
Looks to me like what happened is in February you said, I'm going to be honest with the American people. I'm going to give it to them straight. Vaccination of teachers is not a prerequisite for safely opening schools, and the Biden administration hung you out to dry. They said, nope, she ain't talking for us. She ain't talking as the head of the CDC. She's talking as Dr. Walensky. And then a month later, you said, well, you know what? I better not be totally honest with the American people. So I'm going to say vaccinated people do not carry the virus and they don't get sick. And everyone understands, like, wow, I know someone who's been vaccinated and they've gotten sick afterwards. I think what happened is you tried to be honest and they said no. And then you said, well, I'm going to have to hedge a little bit. I'm going to have to give the American people misleading statements from the head of the CDC. You were speaking as head of the CDC in both situations, right?
I have said I've been speaking as the head of the CDC.
All the time? Yeah. Well, it'd been nice if you'd have just been honest and straightforward with the American people every single time throughout this virus. With that, I yield back.
I have stood by my commitment to tell the American people what I know when I know it. Thank you.
Mr. Durham, in the summer of 2016, did our government receive intelligence that suggested Secretary Clinton had approved a plan to tie President Trump to Russia?
Yes.
Was that intelligence important enough for Director Brennan to go brief the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the Attorney General of the United States, and the Director of the FBI?
Yes.
And was that intelligence put then into a memorandum, a referral memorandum?
Yes.
And was that memorandum then given to Director Comey and Agent Strzok?
That's who it was addressed to, yes.
Did Director Comey share that memorandum with the FISA court?
I'm sorry, can you?
Did he share that memorandum with the FISA court? Did Director Comey do that?
I'm not aware of that if he did.
Did he share it with the lawyers preparing the FISA application?
Not to my knowledge.
Did he share it with the agents on the case, working the Crossfire Hurricane case?
No.
Didn't share it with the agents on the case. Can you tell the committee what happened when you took that referral memo and shared it with one of those agents, specifically Supervisory Special Agent Number 1?
We interviewed the first supervisor of the Crossfire investigation, the operational person. We showed him the intelligence information. He indicated he had never seen it before. He immediately became emotional, got up and left the room with his lawyer, spent some time in the hallway, came back.
He was ticked off, wasn't he? Yes. He was ticked off because this is something he should have had as an agent on the case. This is important information that the director of the FBI kept from the people doing the investigation.
The information was kept from him.
Who's Charles Dolan?
Charles Dolan is a public relations person here in Washington, D.C. He had prior involvement, professional involvement with Russian government, representing Russian government interests. He was a person that was associated with Igor Danchenko.
He was also buddies with the Clintons, wasn't he?
He had held positions when President Clinton was president.
In their campaign advisory to Secretary Clinton's presidential campaign, executive director of the Democrat Governors Association. That's the same Charles Dolan we're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, and wasn't he also a key source for information in the dossier?
He provided some information that was included in the
Ritz-Carlton
dossier, yes.
stuff, the Manafort stuff. In the Crossfire Hurricane investigation and the Mueller investigation, when the FBI interviewed Mr. Dolan, what did he have to say?
To my knowledge, they didn't interview Mr. Dolan.
They didn't interview this guy? Source for the dossier? Key information in the dossier? Buddies with the Clintons, and they didn't talk to him?
No. I mean, we report on that because even Christopher Steele in October 2016 identified Dolan as somebody that might have information.
I find it interesting they didn't talk to him. Were there agents on the case who wanted to talk to Mr. Dolan, Mr. Durham?
Yes.
What happened to analyst number 1? She kept pushing to talk to Mr. Dolan. She was ultimately turned down. What happened to her the day that she was turned down and said, no, we're not talking to Dolan? What happened to her?
At about the same time, she was assigned to a different project.
They moved her. They said, we can't have this. We can't have that. We can't be looking into the Clintons' buddy, a key source for the dossier. They reassigned her. And then what did she do?
She memorialized it.
She entered a memo to the file because she said, at some point the Inspector General is going to want to know this information. I'm going to make sure it's recorded contemporaneously. She put it in the file. It's crazy. They didn't talk to the key source. They kept key intelligence from the investigators. This is how bad this investigation was. But here's the scary part. I don't think anything has changed. The day your report came out, 5 weeks ago, May 15th, you got a letter, Mr. Durham, addressed to you from the General Counsel at the FBI, Mr. Jason Jones, writes you this 6-page letter, and he says, not to worry, everything is fine. It's all been worked out at the FBI. He even says on page 2, he says, had the reforms implemented by current FBI leadership, summarized below, been in place in 2016, failures detailed in your report never would have happened, and he underlines it. He said this would never happen because of the reforms we implemented in 2019 and 2020. And then he says on page 4, one of the specific reforms, he says, FBI executive management has instructed investigations should be run out of the field and not from the headquarters. That statement is not true. 5 weeks ago, the FBI wrote you and said everything has changed when in fact it hasn't, and a statement in there is absolutely false, and we know it's false because 2 weeks ago today, We interviewed Stephen D'Antuono, former head of the Washington field office, Mr. Durham, and here's what he said in his transcript. Head of the Washington field office, when the Trump classified document investigation began, he said, that case was handled differently than I would have expected it to be, than any other cases handled. We learned a lot of stuff from Crossfire Hurricane, that headquarters should not work the investigation. It's supposed to be the field offices. My concern is that the Department of Justice was not following these principles. Nothing is, and that's the thing that scares me the most. Nothing has changed. Mr. Durham, I'm just finished with this. 60% of Americans now believe there's a double standard at the Justice Department. You know why they believe that? Because there is. That has got to change. And I don't think more training, more rules is going to do it. I think we have to fundamentally change the FISA process, and we have to use the appropriations process to limit how American tax dollars are spent at the Department of Justice. I yield back. Gentlelady from Texas. I thank the gentleman. Mr. Durham, Carter Page is an American citizen who, Naval Academy grad, served our country. Why not just talk to him before you spy on him?
In this instance, I mean, I don't know if people looked at this in the report. There was a particular piece of information that had been given to Michael Isikoff and appeared in a Yahoo News article on September 23rd, in which Mr. Isikoff lays out what he's obviously been told, and it's clearly the information from Steele. But it also included a statement that a senior law enforcement official confirmed that Carter Page was on the radar screen. That matter was never referred for investigation as to who leaked that. This is an investigation that's supposed to be closely held, confidential, sensitive investigative matter, and that's never referred to, nobody ever looked at. Who's the senior law enforcement officer who gave the information to Michael Isikoff that Carter Page was on their radar screen? That's not number one.
Who do you think it was?
Mr. Chairman, the time is well expired. The witness could answer the question. You can't ask another one.
I appreciate the ranking member for pointing that fact out.
Okay, I'm not sure. Am I supposed to answer or not? Am I done?
I'll let you answer.
Oh, okay. So then, with respect to Carter Page, within 2 days of that article, wrote a letter to Director Comey saying, I didn't do the things that are suggested. I didn't meet with these people. I'm willing to sit down and talk to the FBI. You know, tell me when and where, essentially.
He offered to be interviewed. The gentlelady from Texas, the lady yields back. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Durham. That's not part of the report. It is a lot of what I've heard from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. One of my colleagues from California said, I don't know what we're doing here. And what we're doing here is going through this very damning report. The FBI has failed many times over the years that you investigated them. I'd like to ask, did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without speaking to the people who provided the information?
Yes.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane on a Sunday, only 3 days after reviewing the information?
Yes.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without any significant review of its own intelligence database?
Yes.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without interviewing the essential witnesses?
Yes.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without using any of the standard analytical tools typically employed in evaluating intelligence?
Yes.
Did the FBI consider the possibility that it was the target?
It didn't appear so to me from the evidence.
And so I'm curious if you could tell me, because I'm not a prosecutor, some of my colleagues here are, but the average American is not. Can you tell us why and under what motivation would a prosecutorial agency act in such a way where it willfully ignores multiple instances of exculpatory evidence throughout the course of its investigation? Because I just don't understand that.
That, in my experience, that is not the norm. That's not how the FBI performs. In this particular case, as is reflected in the report, there appear to be persons in the FBI who were central to opening the investigation that had rather strong views concerning then-candidate Trump.
And we've heard in your report that you reference confirmation bias. And a lot of times, or sometimes, we see that the investigators, perhaps the FBI investigators, they have a confirmation bias because they want a guilty outcome. They want to find the suspect guilty. But we did not see that to be the case for Hillary Clinton. So it makes me think, that based on the investigation into the conduct and the continuous disregard for duty, there was obviously a special motivation to find this suspect, Donald Trump, and his campaign guilty above anyone else. Would you agree?
I can speak to what the facts show, as documented in the report. Again, people draw their reasonable inferences, conclusions from those facts with an honest reading of the report.
If either you or someone on your team willfully ignored exculpatory evidence, refused to interview key witnesses, favored one suspect over another, or did any or all of the things that the FBI did during Crossfire Hurricane, would you face repercussions?
There ought to be repercussions. If that ever happened in connection with an agent that I was working with and I knew about it, the first thing would be to report it to the court, and the probably second thing would be to report it to their superiors. The third thing would be sure that that agent never worked with me again.
I appreciate that. I also appreciate your remarks earlier in your open testimony where you said, my colleagues and I carried out our work in good faith, with integrity, in the spirit of following the facts wherever they lead, without fear or favor. I believe you did that. I'm disappointed in some of my colleagues that have said disparaging remarks about you. I've seen very few that actually talk about your report. They want to talk about everything else, which tells me you're onto something. I'd also yield the balance of my time to the chairman.
I appreciate the gentleman for yielding. So Danchenko is the primary subsource. A few years before he does this work, he was investigated by the FBI for espionage. Is that right, Mr. Durham?
Correct.
And that case was halted because the FBI thought he left the country, right?
Correct.
Had he left the country?
No.
Where was he living?
He remained living in the place that he was living when they opened the investigation.
Right here in D.C., right?
Yeah.
He hadn't left anywhere. He's right here in D.C., and we're going to stop this. And then they go hire him, use the tax money of the people I get the privilege of representing to pay this guy who they obviously knew was a Russian spy. They hire him, who's the source of all the false information. Is that true?
They paid him, they hired him, and they paid him.
Couple $100,000, if I recall, right?
It was over $200,000.
Yeah, and then this guy is hanging out with Dolan, Charles Dolan, who's a buddy of the Clintons, who's also a source for the false dossier that was used to spy on an American citizen. He's hanging out with Dolan. In fact, don't they meet on a park bench somewhere in Arlington, Virginia on New Year's Day?
New Year's Day, middle of the day.
I mean, this is straight out of the movies, right? And the FBI says, but we're not going to talk to Charles Dolan. I mean, this is two of the dumbest things I've ever heard of. They won't talk, they pay a guy who's a Russian spy who's the source of the dossier. The other source of the dossier is Charles Dolan, who meets with that guy on a park bench in Arlington, and they don't want to interview him. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. But that's what Comey's FBI did. And they're still doing this kind of baloney because Mr. D'Antuono told us so, running operations, running investigations out of headquarters instead of assigning a U.S. attorney, a job you did for a long time and did very well. That is a huge problem. And your report, that's why your report's valuable. Gentlemen, I yield back to the gentleman who was out of time, and we now recognize the gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Anderson, should we be doing gain-of-function research?
I think fundamental biology research, which includes gain-of-function research, is important. However, such research should, of course, be done safely.
Was gain-of-function research being done, Dr. Gary, at the lab in Wuhan, China?
I have not reviewed all the research that was being done at the Wuhan Institute, so I don't really have a professional opinion on.
Do you have a professional opinion, Dr. Anderson?
To my knowledge,
there was... Yeah, I know you got professional opinions about lots of things, but do you have one on that?
To my knowledge, there's no gain-of-function research, although there is work involving chimeric viruses, for example, as we discussed in our proximal origin paper.
Was the lab in China up to the code for doing the kind of research that you just described, Dr. Anderson?
I don't know about any of the codes, anything going on at the Wuhan Institute.
Would it be up to the, would it be, my understanding is it wasn't. Do you think it was up to the code necessary to do the kind of research that you think they were doing there?
Again, I can't talk to the code of the lab itself. I think what is clear from the published research from the Wuhan Institute of Virology was that a lot of this research was done at biosafety level 2, which I considered at the time to be insufficient, and today, especially given the diversity of related viruses.
So just to be
that we
clear,
have
you guys
found
don't know whether they were doing gain-of-function research or not. You think they weren't. I think they were. You think they weren't. But regardless of that, what they were doing there, what the biosafety level at that lab wasn't up to the code it should have been for the research they were doing.
Doing this type of research at BSL-2 using bat coronaviruses is commonly done at BSL-2. The lab work, or the animal work, I should say, is done in BSL-3. Again, this is all available.
What level of lab would you want? If you're doing the research, Dr. Anderson or Dr. Gary, what level lab? What level would you want, 2 or 3?
This would again typically be approved at biosafety level 2. However, as I said from the beginning, is that I believe, especially given everything we know, based on how many of these coronaviruses we have, that this kind of work should in future, via international regulations, be done at BSL-3.
Should be done at a higher level than it was done there. Correct. That's what you're saying. Got it. All right. And should it go through? We have this process, Dr. Gary, this P3 process, this approval process for this type of grant money to be used and this type of work to be done. Should it go through that process before it's approved?
I mean, in your hypothetical, yes. I mean, of course, we should follow the regulations. Okay.
So my understanding is American tax dollars went to this lab in China. Is that right, Dr. Gary?
I don't know I don't have any information myself about.
I think commonly reported EcoHealth sent the money there. American tax dollars were used in the Wuhan lab, this lab we've been talking about.
Again, I haven't reviewed the financial transactions between the NIH and EcoHealth Alliance.
Okay, Dr. Anderson, just real quick, and I know you've touched on this earlier. So on January 31st, the now email that, somewhat famous email that you sent, virus looks engineered, virus not consistent with evolutionary theory. I think that was part of that email and comments Dr. Gary made, where it was what prompted the conference call. And then 4 days later, you come back and basically say, if you believe it came from a lab, then it's some crackpot theory. And what happened in that? I mean, that's a pretty dramatic change in 4 days. And I know you've talked about it before, but that's what I think I find so concerning is you went from virus looks engineered, not consistent with evolutionary theory, to you're crazy if you think it came from a lab, and that all happened in 4 days.
So that is a misrepresentation of what the email actually says. Let me just read that sentence, because I say the main crackpot theories going around at the moment related to this firing being somehow engineered with intent, and that is demonstrably not the case. I'm very specifically referring to the fact that this is engineered with intent, i.e. a bioweapon.
Okay,
at that time, I still
fair enough.
believe-
So you're saying there wasn't an intention to have it done in a lab, but so you're not saying it couldn't have come from a lab?
That is correct. At that time of writing this email, in fact, I thought the plausibility of this being a lab-cultured virus was still high. I kept that belief until mid to late February.
Do you think you've been strong on the zoonotic theory. Do you think it could have come from a lab, even today as you sit here?
Not as I said here today, no. I think the plausibility of this having come from the lab, given the evidence, I don't find that plausible at all.
FBI's wrong. People who disagree, people who think it came from a lab is wrong. The fact that American tax dollars went to a lab in China, a lab that wasn't up to code, should have been level 3, even based on what you guys say, wasn't up to code, doing, I think, potentially gain-of-function research, and it breaks out in that town in China. But somehow, no, it can't even be possible that it came from a lab. It has to be the zoonotic approach.
It is possible. As I'm saying, I don't find it plausible, or maybe I should say probable, given the evidence that we have available to us. Again, anything is possible, and as we are saying in the proximal origin paper and also in later papers, is that it is currently impossible to prove or disprove any version of the origin, whether lab or not.
Okay, thank you. Are you back? Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. 8 days ago, on July 4th, in the Western District of Louisiana, the court found that the federal government suppressed Americans' First Amendment free speech rights. In his conclusion on page 154, the court said this, the judge said this: plaintiffs are likely to succeed on the merits in establishing that the government has used its power to silence the opposition. Opposition to COVID-19 vaccines, opposition to COVID-19 mask and lockdowns, opposition to the lab leak theory of COVID-19.
opposition to the validity of the 2020 election, opposition to President Biden's policies, statements that the Hunter Biden laptop was true, and opposition to policies of the government officials in power. All were suppressed. It is quite telling that each example or category of suppressed speech was conservative in nature. The court further writes, the United States government seems to have assumed a role similar to an Orwellian ministry of truth. Specific to the FBI, the court said this: the FBI's failure to alert social media companies that the Biden laptop story was real and not Russian disinformation is particularly troubling. The FBI had the laptop in their possession since December 2019 and had warned social media companies repeatedly to look out for, quote, hack and dump operation by the Russians prior to the 2020 election. Even after Facebook specifically asked whether the laptop story was Russian disinformation, the FBI refused to comment, resulting in social media companies' suppression of this story, and as a result, millions of our fellow citizens did not hear the story prior to the November 3rd, 2020 election. Additionally, the FBI was included in industry meetings, bilateral meetings, received and forwarded alleged misinformation to social media companies, and actually misled companies in regard to the laptop story. When the court says the FBI misled, that's a nice way of saying they lied. They lied, and as a result, important information was kept from we the people days before the most important election we have, election of President of the United States, election of the Commander-in-Chief. In a survey last fall, 4 out of 5 Americans said they believe there's a two-tiered system of justice in America today. They said that because there is. They said that because of what they've witnessed. Think about what Americans have seen. National School Board Association, left-wing political group, writes the White House and asks them to treat parents at school board meetings as terrorists. And the Garland Justice Department does just that. They put together a memo, set up a dedicated line of threat communication, a snitch line on parents. As a result, parents get investigated by our FBI, get a threat tag associated with their name, 25 of them, because whistleblowers came and told us were investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Americans have seen the FBI's Richmond field office put together a memorandum saying pro-life Catholics are extremists. They've seen 20 FBI agents, SWAT team members, show up at the home of Mark Houck and arrest him in front of his wife and 7 children, even though he had indicated he'd be happy to turn himself in. And what was he arrested for? Him and his 12-year-old son were praying outside an abortion facility. Some guy starts screaming in his son's face, and he did what frankly any dad would do, defended his child. What's interesting is the National School Board Association apologized for the letter, but the Attorney General refuses to rescind his directive. The FBI did rescind, thank goodness, the Richmond Catholic Memorandum, but they refuse to tell Congress who wrote it and who approved it. And Mr. Houck, when he got his day in court, he was acquitted by a jury of his peers. American speech is censored, parents are called terrorists, Catholics are called radicals, and I haven't even talked about the spying that took place of a presidential campaign or the raiding of a former president's home. But maybe what's more frightening is what happens if you come forward and tell Congress. If you're a whistleblower, come tell the legislature, come tell the Congress what's going on. Look out. You will be retaliated against. Ask Garrett O'Boyle, who told Congress about these issues. Took his clearance, they took his pay, they took his kids' clothes. Ask Gary Shapley, 14-year veteran at the IRS, handled some of the biggest international tax fraud cases at the agency. He comes forward, and the Justice Department kicks him off the case. But here's what's truly unbelievable. Here's what's amazing. With all that history, with all that, the Justice Department and the FBI want the taxpayers they censored, the parents they labeled, the pro-life Catholics they called radical, they want them to pay for a new FBI headquarters. And they want FISA reauthorization of the 702 program in its current form. It's in the director's opening statement. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. There are 204,000 reasons why Republicans will oppose FISA reauthorization in its current form. 204,000 times the FBI improperly searched the 702 database. And unlike the FBI censorship, in the court's opinion, that was focused on conservatives, the FBI's illegal scrutiny wasn't just limited to conservatives. BLM supporters were illegally scrutinized by the FBI as well. And I hope our Democrat friends will join us in opposing reauthorization of Section 702 the way it's currently done. And I think they will. And I hope they will work with us in the appropriations process to stop the weaponization of the government against the American people and end this double standard that exists now in our justice system. With that, I yield to the gentleman from New York for an opening statement. What's the difference between a traditional Catholic and a radical traditional Catholic?
I'm not an expert on the Catholic orders.
Well, your FBI wrote a memo talking about radical traditional Catholics. I'm just wondering if you could define it for us.
Well, what I can tell you is you're referring to the Richmond product, which was a single product by a single field office, which as soon as I found out about it, I was aghast and ordered it withdrawn and removed from FBI systems.
You were aghast, then why won't you let us talk to the people who put it together?
We are working on finishing an internal review into what happened there.
We have to wait. We, the Congress, and the American people have to wait until you do an internal review. It's not a criminal investigation going on here. An internal review before we can talk to the people who wrote this?
When we finish our internal review, which will be very soon, we will come back before the committee
in America?
and provide a briefing on what we found.
Well, we appreciate the briefing, but we want to talk to the people who wrote it. Any idea how many Catholics there are in America, Director?
No, sir.
There's a lot, over 60 million. What percentage of those are radical traditional Catholics, according to the Richmond Field Office of the FBI?
Again, that product is not something that I will defend or excuse. It's something that I thought was appalling and removed it.
Let's read from that product, page 4 of that product. By the way, the copy you gave us, when can we get a copy that didn't have all these redactions on it so we can actually see what the American taxpayers were paying for to see their rights, their First Amendment religious liberty rights attacked? Let me just read from page 4. Provide new opportunities to mitigate extremist threat through outreach to traditional Catholic parishes and the development of sources with the placement and access to report on places of worship. That's pretty fancy language for they're trying to put informants in the parish, in the church. That's what this memorandum said, Director, from one of your field offices. And you won't let us talk to the people who did it. Any response to that?
I didn't know. I was waiting for the question.
No, you think priests should be informants inside the church, Director?
We do not recruit, open, or operate confidential human sources to infiltrate, target, report.
But that's not what this said. It sounds like you were trying to do it in Richmond, Virginia.
No, sir. No, sir.
You weren't? This didn't happen? You can assure us that this didn't happen?
That product did not, to as best as we can tell, result in any investigative action as a result of it. None.
You know what the motivation for this was? Why would they even think about doing this? You know what the motivation was?
Well, again, I think that's what our internal review will find, and I'd rather wait until I hear what the results of that internal review are.
Well, I don't need an internal review. I can read the document. I assume you can do the same, because it says right there on the same page. Richmond assesses extremist interest in radical traditional Catholics is likely to increase over the next 12 to 24 months in the run-up to the next general election. Same paragraph. Events in which extremists and radical traditional Catholics might have common cause include legislation, judicial decisions in such areas as abortion rights, immigration, affirmative action, and LGBTQ protections. It's politics. That's the motivation. In the run-up to the next election, and they talk about the border, affirmative action, and abortion rights, it's total politics. I mean, I think it's interesting that we just got a decision from a bunch of Catholics who sit on the United States Supreme Court relative to affirmative action. Politics was the total motivation here, and that's what's scary. That's what's, I think, so frightening, and how this happens, I don't know. And 5 people signed off on it. 5 people, including the Chief Division Counsel at the Richmond Field Office. I'd like to talk to this lawyer. And a lot of people in this room went to law school, get a course on the Constitution, talks about the First Amendment. I find that really scary. Again, when do you think we're going to have a chance How soon are you going to complete this internal investigation so we can talk to these folks who put this together?
I expect us to be able to brief the committee on our internal review later this summer.
Will that briefing include the names of the individuals who put this document together attacking Americans' First Amendment liberty?
I'm not sure yet what it'll include because it's not done yet, but when it is, we'll provide you with an appropriate briefing.
What are you doing to fix it so this doesn't happen again?
Well, we've already started putting in place a number of fixes, and those will be further informed by the results of the review.
What are those fixes? More training, more things, more. It's that same thing you told us on FISA. And while you may have some improvement, you still got 204,000 times the database was illegally searched. So what are the training and procedures you're putting in place?
Well, I'll put the FISA stuff to the side.
I'm just using that as an example of where you've told us the same thing, you fixed something, and you haven't.
I do not believe the number that you just invoked on the FISA side is since the reforms, the fixes, as you called them.
Can we get an unredacted?
Those post-date the numbers that you're referring to.
Director, can we get an unredacted copy while you're still doing this internal investigation? Can we at least get an unredacted copy of this memorandum?
I will find out if there's more of the document that can be shared with you. We've tried to be very careful in what we redact, and there's always a basis for it. So let me go back and see if there's more that we can provide. But I know my instructions are to be as sparing as possible in the redactions that we provide.
Director Wray, did the FBI ask financial institutions to turn over their customers? Yield the time to me. Did the FBI ask financial institutions to turn over their customers' debit and credit card purchase history in the Washington, D.C. area for January 5th and 6th, 2021?
I don't know the answer to that as I sit here right now.
Well, we do, because Bank of America gave us this email from the FBI to Bank of America.
Well, I am aware that Bank of America provided information to the FBI, but what communications occurred between the FBI and Bank of America about it?
Let's read it. To recap our morning call, we are prepared to action the following threshold. Customers transacting debit card, credit card, Washington, D.C. purchases between 1/5/21, 1/6/21. That's scary enough. But then the next bullet point's even more scary. Any historical, capital letters, all capitals, any historical purchase of a firearm. You guys asked financial institutions, at least Bank of America, we think more. Did you guys ask them?
Again, I don't have the full sequence of the back and forth. You've got one, looks like you've got one email that I haven't seen before here. So I don't know that I have the full exchange that this.
Well, does this email trouble you as much as it does members of the Judiciary Committee? That the FBI is asking for every single, I mean, we had members of Congress here that week, first time they're getting sworn in as a new member of Congress, their family in town, and you're sweeping, and they may happen to be a customer of Bank of America, and you're sweeping up every debit and credit card purchase of their family who were in town that week because their husband or their dad or their mom is getting sworn in as a new member of Congress? And then you're also saying, overlaying that information with, did this person buy a firearm?
And the question is?
I'm just nervous about that. Are you nervous about that?
As I think I've testified before, my understanding is that our engagement with Bank of America was fully lawful, but that we recalled the leads that were cut to field offices.
If it's lawful, that was my next point. If it's lawful, why did you say we're not going to use these leads? That's what Mr. Jensen testified to when we deposed him. The director of the terrorism unit at the FBI, that's what he testified to. Why did you not use the leads if it was lawful to get the information?
Well, there are
Chairman, it's 1 minute and 18 seconds over time.
Sir, there are plenty of times where there are things that we lawfully can do, but that we decide is better that we not do. And I think that's what happened.
The idea that Mr. Massey said earlier, the idea that this is lawful, that you can ask this is scary. This is something else we're going to have to change. With that, I would yield to the gentlelady recognize the gentlelady from, well, we got a unanimous consent request from Mr. Moore.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the Wall Street Journal article I'd like to enter into the record says Republicans eye sweet home for new FBI headquarters in Alabama.
All right, without objection, the chair now recognizes the gentlelady for Texas for 5 minutes, and then we'll take a break, Director. It's back, Director. We appreciate those. The whole country does. In fact, I said this in an interview this morning, a TV interview this morning. Two of those agents who served for years in the FBI, did great work, now work for the committee on the Republican staff. And we appreciate the work they did then, the work they're doing now. But they share the same concerns raised by members of the committee. That's why they came to work for us. So I just got a couple other questions. Any of the FBI personnel who did improper queries of the 702 database, have any of those individuals lost their clearance?
Well, we had Depends on how far back you want to go in time. We've had individuals, if you go back to, say, like 2018, I think was the last I remember, where you had somebody who engaged in intentional conduct, and the person, for example, is gone. I think there were security clearances revoked for people back in that time period, but I don't know that we've had somebody who's engaged in intentional or reckless conduct more recently than that. We have, as you may know, Mr. Chairman, and this actually didn't come up today, but it's important for people to know. We recently put in place a whole new set of accountability policies specifically focused on 702 that go through cascading consequences.
Yep.
And so that's an important
It's been reported that donors of a congressional member of Congress were illegally searched. Has that individual lost their clearance?
I'm not sure I'm familiar with the specific example. So,
well, it's been widely reported that the donor base for a member of Congress has been searched, and I just wondered if the person responsible for that has had any consequences, like a loss of a security clearance.
I don't know the answer.
Okay. Is the FBI assisting the Secret Service in the investigation as to how cocaine wound up at the White House?
Yes, I want to be a little bit careful about what I can say here because the Secret Service is leading the investigation. But as is standard in an investigation where white powder is found, the FBI's lab personnel did an evaluation to determine whether or not there was a sort of biological.
Is that the only assistance?
That's the only assistance we've done so far. We have offered the full range of our assistance to the Secret Service if they want to use us for that purpose. But beyond that, I would refer you to the Secret Service.
Is that offer's been denied? Is that what you're saying?
No, I didn't say that. We've offered it to the Secret Service, but beyond that, I would refer to them.
In October of 2020, when Facebook asked the FBI, is the Biden laptop story Russian disinformation? The FBI's answer was no comment. Who gave that answer?
And before you answer, sir, if I might just interject the fact that we agreed that I would have 2 questions and you would have 2 questions.
I think I said a couple questions.
Yeah. And you've asked a couple.
In fact, I know I said a couple questions, but I gave you 5 minutes,
But I'll.
Do you want another question?
No, I want us to conclude this hearing, and I respect
we will be
your
done in
prerogative
2 minutes
as the
and
chair.
10 seconds.
Thank you.
And we appreciate that. And we obviously appreciate the director being here. In October 2020, when Facebook asked FBI, is the Biden laptop story Russian disinformation, the FBI's response was no comment. Do you know who gave that response?
I did not.
The court knew, and the court said it was Laura Demlow. Do you know who Laura Demlow is?
I do know who Laura Demlow is.
And what does she do?
Laura Demlow is an agent in our counterintelligence division, and she currently works with the Foreign Influence Task Force.
Doesn't she head the Foreign Influence Task Force?
I think she leads it, yeah.
She leads the Foreign Influence Task Force. Did you tell her to give that comment?
Did I what now?
Did you instruct anyone, when Facebook asked, did you instruct them to give the no comment?
I don't remember giving any instruction along those lines, although I should say I'm not sure whether Laura Demlow was in that role at the time frame that you described, but
Again, the court in Louisiana said she was, and said when Facebook asked her specifically, she said no comment. And this is the Foreign Influence Task Force leader, Foreign Influence Task Force that you created as director of the FBI, correct? Oh, that's correct. You created the Foreign Influence Task Force.
I did create the Foreign Influence Task Force.
Yeah, you put that together, and she heads it up. Okay. How did you become aware of the Catholic memo? The one in Richmond that we talked about a couple times today.
As I recall, in one of my regular morning meetings, I learned that there was this product, and that was the same day that I ordered that it be removed.
Was that before or after it was already in the press?
That I can't tell you. My guess is it was probably around the same time, but I don't know.
Did you learn about it? Did the people who brought it up to you, did they learn about it from the press, or was it some internal communication?
I can't speak to how they learned about it. I just know that I was told about it by them, and we had a conversation about immediately taking steps that we then did.
We appreciate that. Yeah. Okay, Director, we appreciate your time today. I know it's been a long day. We already had the unanimous consent from Mr. Gates, so the committee is adjourned.
my time has expired, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes himself. Madam Chair, why are you harassing Twitter?
Congressman, thanks for the question. As you might know, the FTC's work on Twitter goes back a decade. Back in 2000,
I'm not talking about a decade. I'm talking about now. 12 demand letters in 10 weeks, over 350 separate requests you've demanded of Twitter. Why are you harassing them?
Twitter has a history of lax security and privacy policies.
You've asked for every single communication relating to Elon Musk, not communications that he just sent to someone or communications he received, but any time he's mentioned. That actually seems more than harassment. That seems like almost an obsession. Why such an intense focus?
So, Congressman, again, it was found that Twitter's lax privacy policies allowed unauthorized users to co-opt Twitter accounts, including that of Fox News. Subsequently, Twitter voluntarily entered into a consent order with the FTC.
Here's what you wrote in December, Madam Chair. Here's what you wrote in December. Identify all journalists and other members of the media to whom Twitter has granted access since Musk bought the company. You want to know the name of every journalist a private company has talked to? Think that's consistent with the First Amendment?
Congressman, as a former journalist, I take extremely seriously the valuable work that they do and understand that there can be instances in which government action is unjustifiably
particularly, Madam Chair, if I could just interject, particularly in the context here. I mean, it's bad enough if you got government asking a private company about who are the journalists you're talking to. You name 4 of them and say, we want the other names of any journalists you may, in fact, be communicating with. That's bad enough. And I think a threat to the First Amendment, freedom of the press. But in the context of giving us information about how government had suppressed speech on these platforms, that's the context you're asking for. I think that's particularly troubling, don't you?
Congressman, the consent decree that we have prohibits Twitter from sharing personal information with third parties. When we read in the papers, like everybody else, that Twitter may have granted access to third parties, that's what our teams were seeking information about. Again, this is a company whose history with the FTC goes
Madam
back
Chair,
a decade.
we got limited time. Madam Chair, who is David Roque?
Could you repeat that, Congressman?
David Roque, R-O-Q-U-E. Who is David Roque?
I'm not familiar with
You
that.
deposed him last month, June 21st, 2023. David Roque is the independent partner for Ernst & Young's independent assessment of Twitter's program. That's part of this consent decree. Do you know what Mr. Roque said in that deposition?
I'm not aware.
Okay, let me read it for you then, because I think it's pretty important. Mr. Roque testified, again, in front of your lawyers, you deposed him, testified that FTC's conduct made him feel as if the FTC was trying to influence the outcome of the engagement before it had started. He said, in some of the discussions that we were having with the Federal Trade Commission, expectations were being conveyed about what those results should be before we had even begun any procedures. So they're the independent assessor in this consent decree the FTC has with Twitter, and you're telling the guy who is the person. He's the guy. He's Joe the accountant who's going to get this information. You're telling him, you're putting your finger on the scale, telling him what you want the outcome to be, and he's supposed to be the independent fact finder. Why are you doing that?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with those.
Because it was just filed today, but we are. This is filed in court today, and this is your deposition.
I'm happy to take a closer look at it and be back in touch. I will say as a general matter, we want to make sure that the assessors and auditors that are responsible for overseeing compliance are doing their job.
You say Mr. Roque's line, what he testified here, what's been filed in court today, that there were suggestions of what they would expect the outcome to be, they being the FTC, there were suggestions of what they wanted him to go find in his independent assessment of the consent decree agreement between the FTC and Twitter.
Again, I'm happy to take a close look and we can be back in touch with you about that allegation, but our staff are consummate professionals. When they conduct these investigations, they're focused on determining whether there was a violation.
Is your attack on Twitter, harassment on Twitter, is that based on the fact that all kinds of Democrats have asked you to do this and frankly some things that you've written about dealing with, quote, disinformation? Does that have anything to do with it, Ms. Khan?
Congressman, we make only independent determinations about whether there were law violations.
The statement from Chairman Nadler, the statements from the letter, the press release and the letter from 7 Democrat senators that had no impact on it, that's not why you're doing it?
Absolutely not. We look very closely at the specific matter at hand. Again,
12
Twitter
demand
is
letters in 10 weeks telling the independent assessor, hey, put your finger on the scale. This is the results we want. That's not harassment, and it had nothing to do with the fact that every Democrat in this town seemed to be telling you to go after Twitter.
Our focus is on protecting people's privacy and security. Twitter has sensitive data on 150 million Americans, including private messages. We need to make sure, especially given its history going all the way back to 2010, we're doing everything to make sure Twitter is complying with the order.
That's fine. Don't put your finger on the scale, and don't attack the First Amendment and the rights of journalists.
Mr. Chairman,
that,
point of order.
I yield back and recognize the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, thank you for your testimony today, and thank you for the refreshing and aggressive approach you're taking.
Texas is recognized.
I thank the chairman, Ms. Khan. Thanks for coming here to testify before the committee. Would you commit to me to provide all updates necessary with respect to the Live Golf PGA Tour merger, and you're all's looking into whatever is occurring with that?
So, Congressman, I believe it's our partners at the Justice Department that are looking at that.
The FTC is also having some look into what's going on there, to what at least the news accounts I see. But I just appreciate any updates from your office about that and the concerns about it. And I'm going to yield the balance of my time to the chairman.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Ms. Khan, earlier, and I believe the gentleman from Arizona brought this up, you said people's privacy is paramount. I couldn't agree more. And as we talked earlier, I do think there's bipartisan support to deal with that, this sweeping up of data that happens, and scarier yet is FBI purchasing that data. So that is of paramount importance. But I would say the First Amendment's of paramount importance too. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
And then the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, asked you, what's disinformation? And you said you don't really have an opinion on that. Is that a fair assessment of your answer?
As part of our job at the FTC, we're focused on deception and fraud and that sort of thing.
Well, you wrote a couple years ago in a law review article, digital businesses such as Twitter disserve their users by facilitating the spread of disinformation. What were you talking about there then? What's disinformation?
I'm happy to take a closer look at the material you're mentioning, but as part of our work at the FTC, we've seen how fraud and scams can sometimes proliferate on these social media websites. We've launched an inquiry to try to understand, why are some of these crypto scams really proliferating on these sites, and what can we be doing?
These are the first two sentences in the introduction of the piece you wrote, again, just a couple years ago. Digital businesses such as Twitter disserve their users by facilitating the spread of disinformation. Who decides what's disinformation?
From the FTC's perspective, it's deception, deception and fraud.
No, that's fine. You can keep using synonyms, but I want to know who decides that it's deception, who decides that it's fraud, who decides that it's disinformation. In this case, you're talking about social media companies and what gets posted on their platform. Who decides what's disinformation, what isn't?
So, Congressman, again, at the FTC, we're focused on fraud and deception. There is a legal standard about what constitutes fraud. Again, this is about...
But you didn't say fraud or deception, you said disinformation. And my concern is, again, and it's probably the third time I've talked about this, but the sustained attack on Twitter when the ownership there changed and the platform was committed to not taking down speech, not taking down posts, allowing the sharing of information, and not censoring information. And we just had a major decision last week from a court in Louisiana, a federal court in Louisiana, where they said the government was, in fact, pressuring big tech companies to censor, and big tech companies were willing to go along with it. Now we have a change there, and you're going after the one company that's changed how they're doing things. That's what concerns me, particularly in light of the fact that you just wrote about this a few years ago, saying this is what goes on.
Congressman, I'm glad to have the opportunity to clarify some issues here. So we at the FTC have no view on who should or should not own a company. All we care about is that the company is following the law. That's really what our focus is.
We've covered that ground. I want to know about disinformation and who decides what's disinformation. You think the government should decide that?
Congressman, the way I see it is concentrations of economic power, including over speech platforms and communications platform, that it's that concentrated power and the ability to pick who gets heard, who doesn't get heard, to make these types of decisions. That, I think, is concerning to all of us, and the FTC's job is to be promoting...
You know what kind of speech was getting censored? Do you know what the court said last week? Have you read the opinion, by the way?
I have not. It did not concern the FTC.
You know what kind of... You know what kind of speech was getting censored? You know what the court said? Conservative speech. Conservative speech was all, the suppression was virtually all conservative. This is not Jim Jordan talking about, this is not Republicans on the Judiciary Committee talking, this is the federal judge who had the facts, 86 pages of facts, and laid out, put the facts and the law together in this opinion, strong opinion, which said it was a conservative speech that was getting censored and labeled as disinformation.
So, Congressman, I fully understand why, given the extreme concentration of power over some of these speech platforms, why people would be afraid and worried about censorship. I couldn't agree more that when you have a handful of people making decisions about what gets seen, what doesn't get seen, who gets heard.
And you think the remedy to that is for government to decide what's disinformation and what's not?
Congressman, at the FTC, our job is to promote competition. More competition means more people making these decisions, and I think that can alleviate some of the concerns about censorship that you're sharing.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman is Georgia, or yes, okay.
In the first letter on June 7th, he said, I have been granted ultimate authority over the matter, including responsibility for deciding where, when, and whether to file charges. The quote that the ranking member just put up. Later that same month, he sent me the second letter where he said, no, I don't. No, I don't have that charging authority. So June 7th, he says, I'm the boss. I can do whatever I darn well want, file it wherever I want. And then June 30th, he says, no, I can't. What happened in between those two events? Your testimony went public. He goes, oh my goodness, I got to change my story because now the truth's coming out. And it sounds like in this investigation to me, Mr. Shapley, that the prosecutors and the investigators were in agreement for most of the investigation, and then we get to October of 2022. I see Mr. Ziegler nodding his head. And that meeting is where David Weiss told you something. Is that right, Mr. Shapley? What did he say? Can you put your mic on there? What did he say?
Yes, he told me he was not the deciding person on whether or not charges were filed. He told us that D.C. U.S. Attorney had declined to allow charges. He told us that he had requested special counsel authority from Maine DOJ and denied that authority.
And was denied.
That's correct.
Were you the only guy in that meeting?
I was not.
How many other people were there?
There were 7 total people, including me.
You and Mr. Weiss and 5 others, right?
That's correct.
And have any of them come forward and say what you just said is not true?
They have not.
No one has, right?
That is
no
correct.
No one is disputed, refuted. No one said what you said is not true.
That's
and did
correct.
you memorialize what took place in that meeting? Did you memorialize that?
Yes, I did. That day when I returned home from the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office, I put it in an email to the 2 senior executives at my agency.
You put it in an email that day.
That's correct.
Contemporaneous when it happened. I got the email here. It's Exhibit 10 in your testimony when you were interviewed by the Ways and Means Committee, October 7th, Friday evening, 6:09 p.m. That email, right?
That's correct.
Sent to Mr. Walden and Mr. Batdorf. Who are those individuals?
Mike Batdorf is the Director of Field Operations for Southern Division of IRCI, and Darrell Walden was the Special Agent in charge of the Washington, D.C. Field Office.
These are your bosses, right?
That's correct.
Did Mr. Walden get back to you?
Yes, he did.
Remember what he said?
He said, thanks, Gary, you covered it all.
You covered it all. He didn't say, thanks, Gary, but you're wrong, that's not what happened. He affirmed what you said. You covered it all, and you laid it out. You spelled out just what you told me a few minutes ago, right?
That's correct.
What Mr. Weiss told you in that meeting.
Yes.
And when that goes public on June 22nd, last month, Mr. Weiss says, oh, I got to change my story. I better send a letter to the Judiciary Committee where he says, I stand by what I wrote, but I wish to expand. I wish to fix it. And then he had to further go further in July when he sent a letter to Senator Graham and said, to clarify again. They've changed their story. You guys haven't. What do you think happened? What do you think? Mr. Weiss was consistent with the investigators up until this October 7th meeting, and then he changed. What do you think happened, Mr. Shapley?
I mean, I don't know what happened internal at Department of Justice, but what I can say is that the story has been changing from Department of Justice and U.S. Attorney Weiss, and I think the only person that's really had any documents that have been corroborated are my own.
Exactly. I think what happened. I think it's obvious. Anyone with common sense can see what happened because he said it in Mr. Graham's letter. He said, I had discussions with Maine Justice. I had discussions with the folks, the Deputy Attorney General, the attorney, whoever it was, I don't know, but he had discussions with the people at Maine Justice, and suddenly things change. And that all became evident on October 7th. And until October 7th, the investigators, to Mr. Raskin's point, the investigators and the prosecutors, they were in agreement. Here are the facts. Here's how we do it. Here's how we've always done it. We got the two best agents in the place on the case. Let's go. And then shazam, something changes. And I think it's what Mr. Weiss conveyed to Senator Graham when he said, I had discussions with folks at Maine Justice. We don't know what were in those discussions, but it looks pretty obvious what happened. Looks pretty obvious. Initially, everyone was pounding their chest. David Weiss has complete authority. Now, suddenly, he doesn't. He doesn't, because you guys came forward and told the truth. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Lynch from Massachusetts.
Books of social media platforms
the
were violated. And they
Excuse
said
me,
those,
Mr. Chairman, but the last questioner got an additional extra minute. I'm at 35 seconds over. I would
Point
just
of order,
ask that
Mr.
she
Chairman.
be
The
able to
Democrat
finish-
beforehand got an extra
finish
minute.
her sentence.
Trying to be generous.
Finish her
trying to
sentence.
be generous, even when the response is that the government determines the truth.
I
I'm trying
would
to
like
be
for
generous.
her to be able to finish her sentence, Mr. Chairman, then I will yield back.
Okay, Ms. Wiley, you can finish your sentence.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I remember the sentence, but
Okay.
thank you.
Okay.
I just think the
I
point
do.
was, it was.
I do. You were saying
there's
the
a
government
record-
should be the arbiter
Can
of
you
what's
please
truth.
not put
That's
words into
actually-
the mouth of the witness and let her respond?
The chair
It's
now
her
recognizes the
answer.
gentlelady from New York, the gentlelady from California.
I love how you follow the rules,
The time
Mr.
is-
Chairman.
the
It's
time is-
really indicative of
time
what a
is,
kangaroo court this is and what a
It's
circus it
censorship
is.
by the chair. It's censorship by the chair.
Oh, Lord.
Thank you,
Gentlelady from
Mr.
New York is
Chairman. Thank you,
recognized.
Mr. Chairman. Ms. Morris, isn't it true that your October 2020 Hunter Biden laptop from hell story has proven to be 100% factually accurate?
I was 27 when I published that story. It better have been.
Isn't it true that the FBI obtained Hunter Biden's laptop a full 10 months before your story broke?
That's
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes himself. Hard evidence. Mr. Johnson said that we're not only witnesses to censorship, we were victims. The Republican website on the House Judiciary Committee posted this story, and it was limited where it could go. You got to. They exercise censorship of the House Judiciary Republican account, for goodness sake. Ms. Wiley, you were a lawyer for the ACLU?
I was.
Mr. Kennedy, I remember when the ACLU defended they were the champions of the First Amendment. You remember that? You remember that, ACLU?
I remember when the ACLU represented Nazis who they were appalled by.
Appalled, disgusted by, and yet they would defend the crazy things they said, right? That's how much the First Amendment meant to them, right?
Exactly.
I want to go back to where Mr. Stubbe was. I want to talk about this hard evidence that Mr. Goldman says doesn't exist. I want to read from the facts. This is what the White House was saying. I want to go to just three statements. One, cannot stress this is statements from the Biden White House to social media, cannot stress the degree to which this needs to be resolved immediately. Please remove this account immediately. Same kind of thing they put on yours, remove ASAP. But here's the better one. Here's the better one. Mr. Flaherty, who ran this COVID operation misinformation concept at the White House, Mr. Flaherty said this, not to sound like a broken record, how much content is being demoted and how effective are you at mitigating reach and how quickly? And we should just translate that because this is real simple. How much censorship are you doing How much censorship are you doing and how quickly are you doing it? But I think the kicker is what Jen Psaki, the press secretary, said back in 2021. Look at this. Now think about this. The press secretary, we're talking about the White House, considered the center of freedom on the planet. The press secretary in the press room says this. We are in regular touch with these social media platforms, and those engagements typically happen through members of our senior staff, but also members of our COVID-19 team. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation, their definition, of course. Psaki also stated one of the White House asks was of social media companies to create a robust enforcement strategy. So you got the press secretary in the press room in the White House saying we're going to limit the press. Now that is frightening. That is frightening. And Ms. Wiley from the ACLU, lawyer with the ACLU, thinks that's somehow appropriate. We know it's not. And their number one target, Mr. Kennedy, was you, a Democrat, their primary opponent. I find that amazing. And I would like any thoughts you may have on, because here's the scary thing, and Dennis and I had this conversation a while back. If you don't have a robust First Amendment, If you try to restrict what the people say and what the press reports, that is a scary place to go. Because if you can't have debate and work out our differences, like you said in your amazing opening statement, let's work together, let's figure this out. But if you can't have that robust debate and figure things out, the alternative is scary. And that's exactly where we're headed. And I would encourage everyone to read Mr. Kennedy's written statement. I read it this morning. Amazing. He walks through the history here. That is what's at stake, and that's why what you're doing, whether we agree with what you say or not, and I disagree with what you said last week, what they played. I think a lot of people did. You've clarified it, but it's about protecting the Constitution and the First Amendment. I'll give you the last minute and a half, Mr. Kennedy.
Well, you know, what I would say is that the founders and the framers of our Constitution knew that democracy was a very inefficient system, that it had all of these built-in inefficiencies and difficulties. They said that they felt that it would give us the one thing that would give us an advantage over totalitarian systems was this capacity for the free flow of information and a complete lack of control of debate, so that ideas that would eventually mature into policies would be annealed in a furnace of debate and then rise through the marketplace of ideas rather than being dictated from above. And that's what would give the energy, the vibrancy, the vigor to democracy. When they invented this democracy, we were the first one in the modern era in 1780. By 1865, 5 other nations had imitated us. Today, it's 190 nations based upon our system. We are supposed to be the exemplary democracy, and the corner foundation stone of our system is freedom of speech. All of the other freedoms depend on it. If we lose that, not only do we lose our democracy in this country, but the entire world loses us as an example.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better. Now I recognize the gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman, say a request. Mr. Secretary, you know what the number is, don't you? Number that Mr. Gates was trying to get a response from. You know what that number is, right?
Congressman, I would be pleased to provide this committee, you, Mr. Chairman.
You don't know now? You don't know what that is? I mean, again, just to read, because what Mr. Gates was trying to get at, I think what the country would like to know is, we know that there's been an influx of people coming in. Over 2 million encounters on our southern border, inadmissible aliens on our southern border. We know that number has come in since Joe Biden's been president. We know it's a big number. And all he was asking was, how many of that 2-point-something million, over 2 million, how many have went through the adjudication process and actually been removed?
Mr. Chairman.
And you're telling the Judiciary Committee today you don't know what that number is?
Mr. Chairman, what I am sharing with you is that we will provide you with whatever data you request.
No, that's not where I want to go right, but it's a simple, we've had kind of 2 simple questions that you didn't give an answer to, and I just want to know, give you a second chance here if you'll do it. What is that number? Out of that 2-point-something universe of inadmissible aliens encountered on our southern border who've come into the country, been released into the country, how many have went through the adjudication process and then been removed?
Mr. Chairman, I'd be pleased to provide you with that.
Can you guess?
Mr. Chairman, it is
Can you give an estimate?
Mr. Chairman, I will not.
Why will you not give an estimate to the American people? Because they would like to know, because that sort of frames it. Here's what's come in, here's who you've allowed in since Joe Biden's been president, and here's the ones who've actually been removed.
I would say 2 things, Mr. Chairman. Number 1, I will provide that data to you. We will do so.
Well, you're not real good at that, because you've said that other times here, and you don't give us the data. I mean, we asked information about the Disinformation Governance Board, and all we get is redacted documents, so you're not real good about that. And it's a simple question, and frankly, a question we ask you to be prepared for. We wrote you 2 letters in the last several weeks to be prepared to answer that kind of question. I think probably that specific question, and you won't give us an answer. And so the fact that you won't is bad, and the fact that you don't know is just as bad, because it's the one question the country kind of would like to know. What's really happening? When you say all these, pathways and things, and you're just border secure, and all the things you say, we'd kind of like to know what's really happened with the 2-point-something million people who've been released into the country since Joe Biden's been president. How many have went through the adjudication process and been removed?
So now
Simple question.
So now I have 3 points. 1, we will provide the data to you.
God bless you. We've been waiting, but God bless you. I hope you do it this time.
2, we have been cooperating with this committee. We have made countless documents and people available to you. We have provided briefings.
Yeah, and here's what those, by the way, just so you know, I'll let you finish with your third point. Here's what those documents look like. Here's the one you sent to us on when you formed, it's policy and responsibilities in the department's information manipulation mission. That sounds scary enough, information manipulation mission, and it's all redacted. And this is the kind of stuff you gave us when we were trying to figure out who was responsible for putting together the Disinformation Governance Board, and I think my colleague, Mr. Johnson, was asking. And now we're asking a simple question about a number. And the fact that you won't give it to us or don't know it is, I think, a concern for all of us. I would say both sides, because the Democrats probably want to know too. They probably, that's something that should be so obvious, and you won't communicate to. Make your third point.
Mr. Chairman, we'll provide that information to every member.
Will it be like this, or will it be a real number? Will it be like that? Will it be a real number?
Mr. Chairman, the third point I would
Let me ask you real quick. Can you get that number to us like tomorrow? Or is you got to go back, and is it going to take weeks and months and haggling back and forth on all the letters we do? Congress writes letters to agencies and we haggle back and forth, all that dance we have to do. Or can you just get us the number?
Mr. Chairman, we'll provide that data to you as promptly as possible. My third point would be the most fundamental point of all when we speak of immigration. We are dealing with a fundamentally broken system. We have between 11 and 12 million.
I got 50 seconds, so I appreciate that. You've said that before, so I got that point. Don't mean to cut you off, but I got to get this. Now, in your testimony, you said you've arrested 14,000 smugglers. Seems like a big number to me. What happened to those guys?
Those individuals, Mr. Chairman, are, if the evidence so supports, prosecuted for smuggling.
You've referred them to DOJ. You've arrested them. You've given them over to DOJ. What's happened to them? Have they been indicted, taken to trial, found guilty? Are they in prison somewhere? What's the status? That is a huge number, 14,000 smugglers. I mean, God bless you for getting them, but I'd like to know what happened to them.
Very, very pleased to provide that data to you. Let me provide some examples.
You just told us a couple minutes ago you work closely with the FBI. We'd like that information too. That's important. Have you arrested any of them multiple times?
Congressman, I'll provide that information for you.
You think that's a possibility? Some of those smugglers you've arrested more than once?
Congressman, when I prosecuted immigration crimes in the 1990s, we saw individuals who had repeated violations of criminal laws of the United States and repeated removals from the United States. I've prosecuted.
My time has expired. But you think a smuggler, you catch someone smuggling people, smuggling drugs, that guy would be prosecuted, and you'd think you would, again, know that answer too. But we hope you get those answers to us. I yield now to
unanimous.
Gentlemen for yielding. Mr. Secretary, the 140 illegal aliens you've encountered who are on the terrorist watch list. Again, this is Mr. Ice's question earlier in the day. What is the status of those 140 individuals?
First of all, let me allow the record to reflect that I'm not smiling, nor have I smiled.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, will you repeat your question, please?
The 140 individuals who've been encountered on the border who are on the terrorist watch list, what's the status of those individuals?
I believe that question already has been posed, and I mentioned to the chairman that we will provide that data to you.
Have any of them been released, I guess is another way of framing that.
Mr. Chairman, let me say this. Individuals who pose a threat to public safety or national security are detained pending their removal.
Well, that's not what the Inspector General said. He said CBP released a migrant on the terrorist watch list and ICE faced information sharing challenges planning and conducting the arrest. This is from Mr. Kufari, the Inspector General of DHS. You disagree with Mr. Kufari?
We respectfully do.
You do? Okay. I would yield my time to the gentleman from Louisiana. Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. The fix is in. Even with the face-saving indictment last week of Hunter Biden, everyone knows the fix is in. 4.5 years. 4.5 years the Department of Justice has been investigating Mr. Biden, an investigation run by David Weiss, an investigation that limited the number of witnesses agents could interview, an investigation that prohibited agents from referring to the president as the, quote, big guy in any of the interviews they did get to do. An investigation that curtailed attempts to interview Mr. Biden by giving the transit team secret a heads up. An investigation that notified Mr. Biden's defense counsel about a pending search warrant. An investigation run by Mr. Weiss, where they told the Congress 3 different stories in 33 days. They told this committee on June 7th, David Weiss said, I have ultimate authority to determine when, where, and whether to bring charges. 23 days later, June 30th, he told this committee, actually, I can only bring charges in my U.S. Attorney's District, the District of Delaware. And then to further confuse matters, on July 10th, he told Senator Graham, I have not sought special counsel status. Rather, I've had discussions with the Department of Justice. An investigation run by Mr. Weiss that negotiated a plea deal that the federal district court declined to accept. A plea deal so ridiculous, the judge asked this question, quote, is there any precedence for agreeing not to prosecute crimes that have nothing to do with the charges being diverted? The response from the DOJ lawyer, I'm not aware of any, Your Honor. A plea deal so ridiculous that the judge also asked, have you ever seen a diversion agreement where the agreement not to prosecute was so broad that it encompasses crimes in a different case? The response from the DOJ lawyer, no, Your Honor, we haven't. An investigation run by Mr. Weiss that not only had a sweetheart deal rejected, but according to the New York Times, there was an even sweeter deal, an earlier deal, a deal in which Mr. Biden would not have to plead guilty to anything. 4.5 years and all that, and now we get a special counsel. Now we get a special counsel, and who does the Attorney General pick? David Weiss, the guy who let all that happen. He could have selected anyone. He could have picked anyone inside government, outside government. He could have picked former attorney generals, former special counsels, but he picks the one guy he knows will protect Joe Biden. He picks David Weiss. And here's what the AG said in his August 11th announcement of David Weiss as a special counsel. Quote, I am confident that Mr. Weiss will carry out his responsibility in an even-handed and urgent manner. Urgent manner, every witness we've talked to, the 2 FBI whistleblowers that came forward, Mr. Shapley, Mr. Ziegler, the 2 FBI agents on the case, Mr. Sobocinski, Ms. Hawley, they've all said this thing was anything but urgent. The FBI said they were frustrated at the pace. Ms. Hawley said she was frustrated at the pace. And of course, the IRS agents, they said the investigation was slow-walked. And even-handed, they limited the number of witnesses that could be interviewed. They tipped off the defense counsel about a subpoena. The judge says the plea deal was a joke. And all that's just half the story. There's one investigation protecting President Biden. There's another one attacking President Trump. Justice Department's got both sides of the equation covered. Look at the classified documents case. Spring and early summer of last year, the Department of Justice asked President Trump to turn over boxes of documents. He does just that. In the process, President Trump finds 38 additional documents. He tells the Department of Justice, the very next day the FBI comes to his home and he turns them over. Then the Department of Justice asked the president to put any boxes he brought from the White House to his home in his storage room and secure it by locking it. He does that as well. Everything they asked him to do, he did. And then what's the Justice Department do? August 8th, last year, they raid President Trump's home. And according to the FBI agent, Stephen D'Antuono, the assistant director in charge of the Washington field office, the search was a complete departure from standard protocol. When we interviewed Mr. D'Antuono, he said, first, the Miami field office didn't do the search. Instead, they sent folks from D.C. He said there was no U.S. attorney assigned to the case. Instead, it was run by D.C., in particular Jay Bratt, who's now on the special counsel team. He said the FBI didn't get President Trump's counsel's approval before they did the search. And then Mr. D'Antuono told us he had recommended that when the FBI got to Mr. Trump's home, President Trump's home, they contact his counsel, wait for him to get there and do the search together. Of course, the DOJ said no. And then who does the Attorney General name as special counsel in that case? Jack Smith, the guy who a few years ago was looking for ways to prosecute Americans, targeted by Lois Lerner and the IRS, looking to prosecute the very victims of the weaponized government, the weaponized IRS. Jack Smith, the guy who prosecuted Governor McDonald, only to have the Supreme Court overturn that prosecution in a unanimous decision. That's the guy that the Attorney General of the United States selects as special counsel. And you wonder why 4 out of 5 Americans believe there are now 2 standards of justice in our great country. Mr. Garland, I anticipate a number of questions on these 2 investigations. Later in the hearing, I expect from Republicans you will also get questions about the many other concerns the American people have with the department. The school board's memorandum, treating Catholics, the memo that said pro-life Catholics are extremists, the Fifth Circuit decision, great decision, on the Department of Justice and other agencies censoring American speech, and of course the FISA law that's up for reauthorization this year, and how that process has been abused and infringed on the rights, the privacy rights of the American people. Americans believe that today in our country there is unequal application of the law. They believe that because there is. Republicans are committed to making that. Does not recognize himself. Quote, Mr. Weiss has full authority to bring cases in other jurisdictions if he feels it's necessary. That was your response, Attorney General, to Senator Grassley's question on March 1st, 2023. You just referenced it when Mr. Bishop was questioning you. Only problem is he'd already been turned down by the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia, Mr. Graves. So he didn't have full authority, did he?
I had an extended conversation with Senator Grassley at the time. We briefly touched on the Section 515 question and how that process went. I've never been suggested.
My point's real simple, Mr. Garland. You said he had complete authority, but he'd already been turned down. He wanted to bring an action in the District of Columbia, and the U.S. Attorney there said, no, you can't. And then you go tell the United States Senate under oath that he has complete authority.
I'm going to say again that no one had the authority to turn him down. They could refuse to partner with him. They could not.
You can use whatever language. Refuse to partner is turning down.
Well, it's not the same under a well-known Justice Department practice.
Here's why the statute of limitations question is important that Mr. Bishop was getting at just a few minutes ago. Here's why it's important. You let the statute of limitations lapse for 2014, 2015. Those were the years with the felony tax charges where Hunter Biden was getting income from Burisma. Here are 4 facts that I think are so important. Hunter Biden was put on the board of Burisma, made a lot of money, got paid a lot of money over those years, a couple $1 million. He wasn't qualified. Fact number 2, he wasn't qualified to be on the board of Burisma. Not my words, his words. He said he got on the board because of his last name. The brand, as Devin Archer said when he was under oath and we deposed him. Fact number 3, Burisma executives told Hunter Biden, we're under pressure, we need help. Fact number 4, Joe Biden goes to Ukraine, leverages our tax money, American people's tax money, to get the prosecutor fired who was applying the pressure. Interestingly enough, that fact is entirely consistent with what the confidential human source told the FBI, and they recorded in the 1023 form, the same form Mr. Wray didn't want to let this committee and the Congress see. That all happened. That all happened. And what I'm wondering is why you guys let the statute of limitations lapse for those tax years that dealt with Burisma income.
There's one more fact that's important, and that is that this investigation was being conducted by Mr. Weiss, an appointee of President Trump. You will, at the appropriate time, have the opportunity to ask Mr. Weiss that question, and he will no doubt address it in the public report that will be transmitted to the Congress. I don't know the answer to those questions.
Did they forget? Did the lawyers just like let it, did they just like, oh, darn, we let it, were they careless?
I expect that won't be what he says, but because I promise.
You know that's not the case, because as Mr. Bishop pointed out, they had a tolling agreement. They talked to Hunter Biden's defense counsel and say, let's extend the statute of limitations. And then at some point, they made an intentional decision to say, we're going to let the statute of limitations lapse. And I want to know who decided that and why they did it.
Mr. Weiss was a supervisor of the investigation at that time and at all times. He made the appropriate decisions, and you'll be able to ask him that question, and he will. You
know why they did it. Everyone knows why they did it. May not say it, but everyone knows why they did it. They didn't. Burisma, those tax years, that dealt with that involved the president. It's one thing to have a gun charge in Delaware. That doesn't involve the president of the United States. But Burisma, oh my, that goes right to the White House. We can't have that. And we can slow walk this thing along. We can even extend the statute of limitations, and then we can intentionally let it lapse. And we know this investigation was slow. Here's what everyone said. Shapley said, DOJ slow walked the investigation. Ziegler, Slow walking in the approvals of everything. This happened at the Delaware's Attorney's Office and DOJ tax level. Mr. Sobocinski, the FBI agent, said, I would have liked to see things move faster. Ms. Holly said the same. Every witness we've talked to said this thing was slow walked, and we know why. They slow walked it long enough to let the statute of limitations run so they wouldn't have to get into Burisma. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Will the gentleman yield?
No, I'm asking Mr. Garland the question.
I think I've tried to make clear that I don't know the specifics of the investigation. Much of what you are describing occurred during the Trump administration, during a Justice Department appointed by President Trump.
No, it didn't. This is 4.5 years, this investigation. We're talking about the last few years. Your statement was just this year, March 1st, to Senator Grassley.
No, I'm sorry. I was trying to respond to your descriptions of what the IRS agents said about certain things.
Statute of limitations is 6 years. That lapsed here in the Biden administration.
On the statute of limitations, we'll say again that the explanation for why the statute of limitation was lapsed, if it was, has to come from Mr. Weiss.
My time is this, but let me ask one last question real quick here. Who decided that David Weiss would stay on as U.S. attorney?
Look, this had occurred before I came. Mr. Weiss had been kept on. I promised the...
no, I didn't say, you can walk all through that. I said, who decided? The White House decided,
Mr. Weiss,
right? They serve at the pleasure of the president, right?
Mr. Weiss was
Joe Biden decided to keep David Weiss as U.S. attorney. You weren't sworn in until March. He was told he was going to stay on in February.
Expired.
Pretty fundamental question. Who decided David Weiss was going to stay as U.S. attorney in Delaware?
Mr. Weiss,
your time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, your time has expired.
I'm waiting for an answer, and then I'll yield.
Well, you asked the question after your time had expired already. Point of order.
Gentleman can respond, then I'll go to Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Mr. Weiss was the special U.S. attorney from the District of Delaware when I came on. He had been appointed by President Trump. I promised that he would be permitted to stay on for this investigation, and that is what happened.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from New York.
Mr. Weiss was
Joe Biden decided to keep David Weiss as U.S. attorney. You weren't sworn in until March. He was told he was going to stay on in February.
Expired.
Pretty fundamental question. Who decided David Weiss was going to stay as U.S. attorney in Delaware?
Mr. Chairman, your time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, your time has expired.
I'm waiting for an answer, and I'll yield.
Well, you asked the question after your time had expired already. Point of order.
Gentleman can respond, then I'll go to Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Mr. Weiss was the special U.S. attorney from the District of Delaware when I came on. He had been appointed by President Trump. I promised that he would be permitted to stay on for this investigation, and that is what happened.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I believe you misquoted from the transcript of the Senate hearing. I therefore ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the entire transcript of the Senate hearing.
Without objection, but I didn't misquote what Mr. Garland said. Ms. Jackson-Lee from Texas, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yield.
I'll yield to the chairman.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. Mr. Garland, have you or are you investigating who leaked the information that appeared in the Washington Post on October 6, 2022 about this investigation, about the Hunter Biden investigation?
You're saying there was an October 2022...
October 6, 2022, Washington Post writes a story about the Hunter Biden investigation. I wonder, have you investigated who leaked that information to the Washington Post?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Has it been referred to the Inspector General? Do you know that?
I don't want my answer to suggest that there is or isn't such an investigation. I know that the Inspector General sent a letter to Congress explaining that he had an ongoing assessment with respect to the whistleblower's charges. I don't know if that's what you're referring to.
Time the gentleman's expired. Mr. Garland, did you consider, I just want to go back to this question, did you consider anyone else when David Weiss requested special counsel designation on August 8th?
No, Mr. Weiss asked to be made special counsel, and I did not consider an alternative. Of course, to have put in an alternative would have greatly disrupted an investigation that was already ongoing.
I want to be clear. He was the only one under consideration. It was either no special counsel or if there was a special counsel, it was going to be the guy who presided over the investigation for the previous 5 years?
I thought about the possibility, what the consequences would be, both of not appointing him and trying to find somebody else at that time, but there was no other.
And you had no concerns. I mean, the whistleblowers have brought forward all kinds of concerns. Earlier, when someone brought those up, you said, well, those are allegations. I think they stand up well. They've been cross-examined for 4 hours by Democrats in the Oversight Committee. But there were two facts that can be questioned. Two facts about the investigation into Hunter Biden. Fact number one, they let the statute of limitations run. They let it expire. And fact number two, the plea deal fell apart. So I just wanted to make clear that the guy who presided over all that was the only guy under consideration for special counsel designation. Is that right?
Mr. Weiss is a person known for high integrity, for great experience in the prosecutorial realm, and he was appointed by the president.
That's fine. You can say all that. Yeah. I appreciate what you're saying there.
I have no doubts about his abilities in this area.
He was the only one under consideration.
The question was whether to appoint someone, and I thought, I will say, what the consequences would be of trying to switch horses in midstream, but I did not consider any other person.
On July 10th, he wrote Senator Graham, and he said, I've had discussions with departmental officials. He said, I haven't sought special counsel status, but I've had discussions with departmental officials. And I don't know if this was asked earlier, who did he talk with then?
I'm sorry, you're talking about the letter that he sent to
Senator Graham on July 10th.
Again, I'm not going to get into internal deliberations of the Justice Department.
Okay, fine. Is there one person, though, who's like the point person at the Justice Department for David Weiss as he now is functioning as a special counsel in this investigation?
Mr. Weiss is now subject to the special counsel regulations, which require urgent reporting under certain circumstances, require him to consult with numerous places within the Justice Department.
Fine, you're following the statute. God bless you. That's where it's supposed to happen. But you said there's reporting. Who does he report to?
Again, I'm not going to get into
Is it you?
I'm ultimately responsible.
Is it the DAG?
Mr. Weiss did not have to report to anybody. He was the supervisor and decision maker in these matters.
Okay. We have votes on the floor. We're going to have to take another break, Mr. Attorney General. We'll get back here as quick as we can, and we'll start with the Democrats.
Sure.
My time, the Chairman.
Mr. Garland, what changed? On July 10th, 2023, David Weiss wrote Senator Graham and said, I have not requested special counsel designation. August 11th, you announced that he's now the special counsel. What happened in that 31 days?
As I said publicly, several days before my announcement, I think 3 days, Mr. Weiss had asked to become special counsel. He explained that he had reached a stage of his investigation where he thought that appropriate.
What stage is that?
I had promised to give him the resources he needed.
What stage is that? He'd reached the stage. After 5 years, what stage are we in? We in the beginning stage, the middle stage, the end stage, the keep hiding the ball stage? What stage are we in?
I think this one I would go back to the videotape where I said I'm not permitted to discuss ongoing investigations.
Well, isn't that convenient? Something changed in 31 to 32 days from July 10th to August 11th. I think it's too brave. Whistleblowers came forward and a judge called BS on the plea deal. You guys tried to get past them. That's what I think happened. The chair now recognizes the gentleman. Thank the gentleman. We'll now begin with opening statements. Chair recognizes himself. Over 6 years ago, we had a hearing about attempts to curtail free speech on college campuses right next door in the Oversight Committee. The hearing touched on emerging threats to the First Amendment, safe spaces, cancel culture, and the targeting of conservative activist student groups. Unfortunately, this was not a fad, and the hostility towards certain points of view, and particularly conservative points of view, has only grown worse. And it's no longer universities just censoring their students. We now know that American universities were working with the federal government to systematically target speech on the internet. Just this week, the committee Republicans released information showing Stanford University worked with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, and the State Department's Global Engagement Center to censor certain speech in the lead up to the 2020 election. Big government, big academia, and big tech all colluding to limit Americans' First Amendment free speech rights. They were targeting jokes, political opinions. Most importantly, they targeted true information. But the speech that was censored all leaned a certain way. What used to be the bastions of free speech and the marketplace of ideas evolved into institutions of activism and suppression. With, quote, safe spaces and free speech zones aimed to protect students from violence, one would think Jewish students would have somewhere to turn as violent pro-Hamas students take to their demonstrations and have harmed students on college campuses. But that's not the case, as we will see in today's hearing. Nearly a 400% increase in anti-Semitic incidents, including harassment, vandalism, and assault in the 2 weeks after the Hamas attacks against Israel. We need to be doing more to protect the freedom of expression. We're actually working with the ranking member Nadler on some legislation introduced by one of our colleagues, trying to see if we can put some legislation forward that would help in this area. I want to thank my colleagues, including Representative Virginia Fox, Chairwoman of the Education Workforce Committee, for her important work on these issues. I want to thank Representative Murphy, who is a leader on this topic, has introduced 2 bills to advance free speech on campus, and co-chair of the Campus Free Speech Caucus, Ms. Kamick, for her work and passion for this issue. I also want to recognize Mr. Kiley, one of our members, who introduced a bill just last week that denounced anti-Semitism on college campuses. We look forward to hearing from all our witnesses today. And again, I want to thank you for coming. I now will turn to the ranking member for his opening statement, and then we'll get right to our witnesses. Actually, Mr. I forgot. Well, I'll wait till yours done, then I'll play a short video. We have a short 90-second video I wanted to show it. We'll play it right now. Let's play it right now. 90-second video. If we can cue that up, we'll play this about what's going on college campuses.
Free speech debates have roiled college campuses with protests against conservative guest speakers.
The fight against conservative speakers on college campuses escalated.
Administrators failed to stop some students from heckling a conservative speaker on campus.
Former college swimmer Riley Gaines says she was assaulted after giving a speech at San Francisco State University.
I understand and share your objections to a speaker whose rhetoric is offensive and clearly intended to shock and provoke.
I don't think they're less able to listen to opposing views. I just think they take less crap.
Students have been making national headlines protesting controversial speakers on campuses across the country.
Is free speech dead on campus? No, we don't want him to speak. Hopefully we can drown him out.
That's conservative podcaster Michael Knowles being burned in effigy at the University of Pittsburgh.
Your opinions from the bench land as absolute disenfranchisement of their rights.
The president of the University of Pennsylvania, critics say she is not sending a strong enough message against anti-Semitism.
I don't hear people talking about Israeli violence.
Hamas has shifted the balance of power. Hamas has changed the terms of debate.
The Jewish fraternity was hit with a graffiti attack of "The Jews are Nazis."
This is our university.
I want to thank our staff for putting that together. And Chair now recognizes the ranking member, the gentleman from New York, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I apologize. I have to get to. I'm 10 minutes late for another engagement I have to get to. I want to thank all of you for being here. The chair would ask Ms. Hageman if you could come up and take the chair while we go to Mr. Moran, and then Ms. Hageman will close out our hearing. But I did have 2 quick things. Mr. O, you had a point you wanted to make earlier, and I said I'd give you time. You can make that point if you haven't. Committee will be in order if we get the Capitol. You decided to not wait for the police. So if you wanted to do that real quickly, then I did have a question for Mr. Marcus.
Of course, yeah. I just wanted to touch on Representative Roy's question regarding application of DEI offices and why they may not be so effective. I mean, of course, my biggest problem with these offices is the I in DEI, inclusion. Of course, I think it's a pretty safe assumption that everyone here wants the inclusion of all viewpoints. However, I don't understand how such offices can pretend to facilitate that when it's so unequally applied. When we hosted Alan West on our campus, he came to speak about race, and this was heavily protested, especially by members of this office. The university itself and their Distinguished Speaker Series, which is pretty well known in the Buffalo area, was able to host Nicole Hannah-Jones, who is the founder of the 1619 Project. These speakers each came to talk about race. They each have large followings, but the response to them was vastly different. Yep. If DEI offices were committed to handling these topics equally, I fail to see why there was this discrepancy.
So one of the things I've just recently learned about, you made me think of it, you know, I know on campuses we had these safe spaces, we have free speech and all this stuff that doesn't mean, it seems to me the free speech zone should be everywhere. It's called the First Amendment. But we have these things. But I learned about this issue called no contact orders. Have any of the three of you students experienced that dynamic on campus where someone says they don't like your point of view, they report to the DEI officer, someone in the campus in authority, and then there's an order that you're not allowed to have contact with another student because that student is somehow offended by what you believe or what you may have said. Have any of you had any experience with that?
I personally have not had any experience with that, no.
Okay.
I also have personally not experienced that.
Okay.
I have not either.
That's good to hear. Maybe it's not very prevalent, which would be a good thing. Mr. Marcus, in your opening statement, you talked about 4 things you thought should happen that you were suggesting the committee do. If you could just, and I just wrote down 1 to 4, but I didn't get those. If you could just recite those for me again, that'd be great.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. I suggested that Congress could provide the Education Department with tools to address violations of the freedom of speech, similar to the way in which it handles violations of the right to be free of discrimination.
Okay.
Second, that there could be a special advisor or coordinator for free speech within the Department of Education reporting to the Secretary. Third,
promoting free speech, promoting the First Amendment, not the Disinformation Governance Board that the Biden administration tried to set up that would limit speech. Is that right?
That's right, Mr. Chairman.
Got it.
If free speech is addressed, if at all, by the Office of General Counsel, by the Office for Civil Rights, there are implications of work done by the Office of Post-Secondary Education and other components, but there is no institutional repository of knowledge on how it is that free speech can be protected.
Okay.
Third, I suggested that the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act would provide important tools for the Education Department. And I believe the fourth one is that there could be a check on whether the Biden administration is indeed planning to issue the promised regulations implementing the Trump Executive Order 13899 next month as promised in the OIRA Unified Agenda and Regulatory Plan, but for which there's been no talk in
that's something that's current that we need to pressing right now. I want to thank all of our witnesses, particularly our students, Ms. Silberstein, especially you and what you've had to endure. But thank you all for being here. The chair now recognizes the gentleman
for 5 minutes.
Ms. Carnahan, was Director Wray wrong when he said he didn't agree with the process that was followed in selecting the site in Maryland?
I asked my general counsel to look into all of the concerns that were raised in Director Wray's letter, and they found those to be without merit.
He says we have concerns about fairness and transparency in the process and GSA's failure to adhere to its own site selection plan. So he didn't just say there were problems. He said you didn't follow your own rules. And you say that's not true?
Our general counsel found that we did follow all of the rules.
What do you say? You're the boss.
I agree that we followed all of the rules.
So Senator Kane's wrong as well when he says irrevocably undermined and tainted and this decision must be reversed. He's wrong as well?
Look, there are a lot of people who are interested in where this site goes. We ran the most fair and
Well, I'm interested too. I don't want it to go either place. I don't think we should be rewarding the FBI with the same FBI that said pro-life Catholics were extremists, the same FBI that retaliated against whistleblowers, the same FBI that censored Americans. That's not Jim Jordan. We know this. We've seen the domain perspective about what happened at the Richmond FBI. We've had whistleblower testimony in front of Congress telling about how they've been retaliated against. And we know they censored Americans. The Fifth Circuit told us that. So I don't want it to go to either place. Frankly, if it goes anywhere, it should go to Huntsville, where they already got all kinds of land, all kinds of space, and all kinds of operations. But I am concerned about this process. How long did Ms. Albert have the position where she could overrule the 3-person panel? How long was she in that position?
So Ms. Albert was the head of the Public Building Service for GSA. She was in that position for, I think, 2 years. We made the decision.
How long has she been at GSA?
I believe she started in July of 2021.
Okay, so she was there a couple years, but she's recently left?
Correct.
And she left before the decision was made public, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So you say that Senator Kane is wrong in his assessment and Director Wray is wrong in his assessment as well?
We ran a fair and transparent process, Congressman. That was my directive to our team, and it was we did that in the extreme. Every document that we've used to make any of these decisions is available online. I would encourage you to take a look at those.
Correct me, maybe I'm wrong, but didn't a three-person panel looked at all of this and they made a decision, and then that was overruled by Ms. Albert, who had been at GSA for all of 2 years, and then she left. After she overruled, she left before you guys make the decision public. Isn't that how it played out?
So I want to just focus on a term that you're using, and that is overruled. The normal process for GSA when it makes site selections is to have a panel that makes some recommendations. They look at a lot of things and they recommend. But we then have the senior real estate professional at the agency make an ultimate decision. In fact, sometimes those decisions are different. The interesting thing is
how often have they been different?
The most interesting thing is that in this case...
How many times has this happened where the panel suggests one thing, recommends one thing, and then one individual who's in this position that Ms. Albert had comes in and overrules? How often does that happen?
Let me tell you the most relevant time that...
No, that's not what I asked. I asked how often has it happened?
So I'll have to get back to you on that number, but there is a very relevant
situation. Is it rare?
Situation.
Is it often? Is it all the time? Can you give me that?
In this particular project, it happened. Because in 2014, when all of the sites were looked at originally, there was a panel. It down-selected dozens of sites to 3.
Mm-hmm.
All 3 were in Maryland.
Okay.
The Site Selection Authority, over that, the equivalent of Miss Albert, decided that wasn't right and picked 2 in Maryland and 1 in Virginia, the site in Springfield. So in this project, there is a history.
That still begs the question I'm asking. So you've had it happen twice in the same project. How often does it happen anywhere else? That's an important answer for us to have. And when we're evaluating how you did this, particularly in light of what the chairman and Mr. Conley just said, that there's going to, and I assume the ranking member agrees with this too, there's going to be an inspector general investigation in all this. So we kind of like to know that answer. It's a pretty important fact. If you say if it only has happened twice and it happened on the same issue, this FBI headquarters, which many of us on this side don't want going to either Maryland or Virginia, frankly, in light of what the FBI has been up to regarding the American people, that's pretty important. And I agree with the chairman. I think an inspector general investigation is exactly what is needed to get to the bottom of this. And if we find out this hardly ever happens, but happened twice with the FBI headquarters, holy cow, that I think tells us something in and of itself. And my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Ms. Subramaya, I would argue it's already here. You said in your statement you want to give us a glimpse of what lies ahead. I think it's already here. In the course of our investigation in this committee, on January 15, 2021, the FBI sent to Bank of America, tell us all your customers' purchases in the Washington, D.C. area for a specific date. Customers transacting debit card or credit card Washington, D.C. purchases on specific dates in this town. Anyone, whether you're here for the rally, whether you're here for any kind of protest, if you're just in visiting your mom. And they further said, and they capitalize any historic purchase going back 6 months for any weapons or weapons-related vendor purchases. That is frightening stuff, because you gave the example, I think Danny Bolford, you gave the example. I think it's already here.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm working on issues related to that here in the U.S. There are people who have been debanked in America. They generally tend to be on the conservative side. I've interviewed pastors, missionaries who do good work overseas. They've been debanked with no explanation. The reasons are very vague, that your risk profile doesn't match what we're comfortable with. And so these are people who've been debanked for doing good work, and they generally tend to be on one side of the political spectrum.
But by the way, I think in your testimony you said this guy, Mr. Bolford, was former Royal Canadian Mounted Police, was not charged with anything, wasn't being held, was released, and that's when the debanking took place. Is that accurate?
Yes, roughly. They were all happening around the same time.
But he wasn't charged with anything, and yet he couldn't get access to his account.
So the Trudeau government invoked the Emergencies Act. It's only been invoked twice during the 2 world wars. And one of the outcomes of the Emergency Act was to go after people who were peacefully protesting against the COVID-19 vaccine requirements. And if you donated to the cause, you found yourself debanked. And this is what ended up happening with 280 people.
Mr. Taibbi, is there a realignment happening? I mean, I look at today's panel. The Democrats invited an individual who worked in a Republican administration, and Republicans invite two former Democrats, award-winning journalists. One was the hero of the environment as recognized by Time magazine. The other one worked for Rolling Stone. And we invite a foreigner to come tell us, hey, don't let this stuff happen here. If America goes this way, the whole world's in even bigger trouble. I mean, it seems to me there's a realignment happening, and I think I've invited more Democrat witnesses to testify in front of this committee than the Democrats have, because the focus is on the First Amendment. And I don't care whether you're Republican, Democrat, independent, conservative, progressive. What I care about is the ability to speak, and to speak in a political fashion and not have the government come after you for doing so. So I think there is a total realignment happening in the culture and in politics, and frankly, I think that's a darn good thing. Not what they're doing, but the realignment.
Well, yeah, I definitely agree with you that there's a realignment going on. Until very recently, I think free speech and free speech culture was uncontroversially embraced really by both parties. During the entire early period of the war on terror, those issues strongly animated most Democrats that I knew. Most of my friends were in opposition to laws like the Patriot Act, or at least concerned about them, the potential for overreach there. Most people understood, for instance, the work of the ACLU in defending cases like the Skokie March. And to the point about hate speech that was brought up before, I think it's important to point out that the reason that they defended those marchers is not because they liked hate speech or they liked Nazis. Right. It's because the American tradition understands that the moment you grant a government official the right to prohibit one kind of speech, you're going to have a whole series of people. Those people are all civil rights activists. They were afraid that the next thing that would happen would be, Southern officials banning NAACP marches. That used to be sort of universally understood in America, and for some reason in the last decade or so, there's been a complete change in how we look at those issues.
Yeah, I just want to do one last thing in the remaining few seconds I got. Let's put this on the screen, because I think this is interesting too. It tells you how upside down things have become. We have testifying in front of us today Ms. Subramania, who is from Canada, telling us, look, get ready, because we've seen what's happened in our country and we don't want it happening here. This is a recap of a phone call from one of the executives at Facebook with folks from the White House. And the person recapping this just happens to be the former UK minister in the Member of Parliament, Nick Clegg. And he says this: I countered that removing the content like the White House wanted them to do would represent a significant incursion in traditional boundaries of free expression in the United States. So we got a Canadian warning us, we got a Member of Parliament warning. I think it's interesting, the irony here, that someone from Great Britain is telling us about what our rights are. I mean, we had a little skirmish way back in 1776 about this very kind of thing. I mean, this is how upside down it has gotten. I don't know Ms. Subramania's politics, but 2 former Democrats, 3 journalists, and they've invited a Republican. It just tells you what is going on. But I think, again, underscoring how important this is. And it's not crazy, it's not bogus, it's not unfounded, as the Democrats have said. And the Fifth Circuit has certainly said it's not those 3 things. I'm over time, but I'll now yield to Mr. Allred. The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time to the ranking member, Ms. Plaskett.
Thank you to my colleague for yielding the time.
I'll recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Ms. Clark, in the the Missouri versus Biden case in the district court, the court explained, quote, if the allegations made by the plaintiffs are true, the present case arguably involves the most massive attack on free speech in United States history, close quote. Court went on to find that the plaintiffs were reasonably likely to succeed on the merits at trial, entered a preliminary injunction. The Fifth Circuit has affirmed. Supreme Court has taken jurisdiction of the case. Of course, that's all civil litigation. Is any criminal investigation or prosecution of the persons responsible for that activity in the FBI, CISA, and at the White House and their co-conspirators underway in the Civil Rights Division?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with this litigation, but happy to bring your question back.
Thank you. So let me just make sure I understand that. You are not aware of the Missouri versus Biden litigation that is currently being taken up by the United States Supreme Court. Is that correct?
Unfortunately, I'm not, Congressman.
Well, assuming that you're not aware of that, what reason would there be that the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department's leader is unaware of what a United States District Court has described as the most massive attack on free speech in the United States history?
If you could share more of the facts, that could be helpful, Congressman.
Otherwise, you just don't know. Is that correct?
That's correct. Unfortunately, this does not appear to be a case that I'm familiar with.
Well, good enough. I'm going to yield the balance of my time to the chairman.
Is the gentleman from Ohio?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So I find that to be astounding. I do want to follow up on the line of question with the gentleman from California with respect to the FACE Act implementation, because Ms. Clark, you dismissed saying, well, I can't.
Whose time are we doing now?
Go ahead, Mr. It's my time. I'll let the gentleman.
That's what
I may send to the gentleman from Ohio after you. But
I just wanted to point out that there have been at least 35 cases of the FACE Act being applied to pro-life groups and/or churches, or pro-life people that are anti-abortion in your tenure, not even counting 2021. That's the data from 2022 and 2023, versus the 4 that we can point to, the 1 that you point to in January. So the point, gentleman from California, I would just ask, you're in your possession of your hands. You had a FOIA request that was responded to from a left-leaning group, the Center for Investigative Reporting. We've been asking for a copy of that FOIA about the prosecution levels and the numbers from your office for a long time, I think for almost a year, and we've not been responded to. So will you commit to sharing that FOIA request and all of the data of FACE Act prosecutions, specifically under your watch and generally?
I can absolutely bring this back to the division's FOIA officials and ensure that you receive a timely response. Please know that the division is committed to even-handed enforcement of the FACE Act.
Even under your watch, it's at least 35 to 1 or 2. That is not even-handed. That's far from even-handed. And importantly, Mark Houck, who was targeted, had a raid of his home, prosecuted under this, was acquitted by a jury. Have you apologized to him on behalf of the Department of Justice for that grave violation of his civil rights, having his family have to watch him being raided at his home, and then he's acquitted by a federal jury? Have you apologized to him?
Well, we follow the facts and apply the law. That is our job, and we welcome opportunities to engage with other pro-life groups that may be experiencing threats or acts of violence.
The answer to that is no. Does the
reclaiming my time, I yield to the gentleman from Ohio, Madam Chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I'm like, I think every member, at least on this side, but I would think every member, anyone watching, is just astounded that you are not familiar. The Assistant Attorney General for the Division of Civil Rights at the Justice Department is not familiar with a huge case, Missouri v. Biden, where in that case, I think it was 6 different federal agencies were found to be guilty of violating the First Amendment liberties of Americans, HHS, NIAID, FBI, DOJ, DHS, even the White House itself, and you are not familiar with that, is truly, frankly, I don't know what I think that's why the gentleman had time to yield back, because he didn't know what I don't know what we say. That is it's in front of the Supreme Court, and the head of Civil Rights Division doesn't know. That is scary. And if that doesn't in and of itself show that this Justice Department is political and doing things for political reasons, I do not know what does. I yield back, and I appreciate the gentleman's question.
I yield my time.
I think the gentleman from North Carolina and the gentleman from Ohio, the gentlelady from Vermont is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Assistant Attorney General Clark, thanks so much for being here. And I wanted to start by just personally thanking the...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Clark, are you sure that you don't know anything about Missouri v. Biden? You don't know anything about that case?
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify. This is a case being handled by our civil division, and I assure you, Chairman, that the Justice Department...
Have you read the opinion?
The Justice Department is compliant
No,
with
I didn't ask that. Did you read the opinion, either from the Western District of Louisiana or the Fifth Circuit opinion?
I gleaned the ruling, but it's not a Civil Rights Division case.
Well, which is it? Because, first of all, when Mr. Bishop asked, you said you didn't know one darn thing about it. Now you're saying you gleaned or you glanced or what?
I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. The Civil Division is handling this case, and the Department is compliant with the court's
Well, First Amendment
injunction.
rights are pretty fundamental rights. That's something you don't think the Civil Rights Division should be involved in. This is censorship.
Absolutely, Chairman. The First
you're
Amendment
not?
is a bedrock principle of our democracy.
Well, let me go a little different route then. Do politics drive the decisions at the Justice Department today?
Politics have no place in the work of the Civil Rights Division.
3 months ago, the New Mexico governor announced a 30-day ban on citizens' right to carry a concealed firearm in Albuquerque and the county that Albuquerque sits in. What did the Justice Department do when the governor did that unconstitutional order? What did the DOJ do in response to that unconstitutional action from the governor of New Mexico?
I am generally aware of the matter that you are referring to, but gun control is not a core issue that we handle.
Second Amendment, a fundamental right like the First Amendment, it's pretty important, isn't it?
These are very important issues to the department.
Well, tell me what the Justice Department did when this happened, when the governor imposed this unconstitutional ban.
I'm happy to bring your question back to my colleagues.
You don't know that one either.
The criminal division and the civil division.
You don't know about Missouri v. Biden. You don't know what the DOJ did in response to the governor of New Mexico's action. Well, here's what the county sheriff said. He held a press conference saying that this thing was unconstitutional, unenforceable, and incapable of stopping and curbing gun violence. The New Mexico Attorney General, who's a Democrat, said this thing will not have any impact on public safety and does not pass constitutional muster. So when the Democrat Attorney General of New Mexico said it doesn't fit the Constitution, but you guys at DOJ don't do a darn thing? Is that what you're telling me?
Politics have no place in the work of the Justice Department, Chairman, but
Are you aware of anything the Justice Department did to that unconstitutional order from the governor of New Mexico?
Not in the Civil Rights Division, Chairman, but I can certainly
Broader,
bring your question.
You're an important person in the Justice Department. Did the Justice Department do anything?
Yes, we enforce the laws that Congress gave us, Chairman.
No, in this case, did the Justice Department do anything?
I will bring that question back to my
I'll give you the answer. They didn't. They didn't file an amicus. They didn't put any statement of interest. They didn't do a darn thing, which gets back to the point I think Mr. McClintock was making earlier. It shows, I think, how political you are, because when Texas passed a pro-life bill on September 1st, 2021, 8 days later, the Department of Justice announces an investigation into that bill. Now, this is what amazes me. That's a bill that actually passed the state House, passed the state Senate, was signed by the governor, and you guys are in there contesting that 8 days later. But you have something in New Mexico, which is an obvious direct assault on the Second Amendment, and it's an order from the governor. It didn't go through the legislature. The governor does it, and the Department of Justice does nothing.
The Civil Rights Division is deeply committed to enforcing the laws that this body gave us and committed to standing up for the rights, the civil rights of all Americans, Chairman.
Well, you can say it, but based on some of your other answers, not knowing the first thing about Missouri v. Biden, not knowing what, if anything, was done, because nothing was actually done, relative to the governor's unconstitutional order regarding New Mexico citizens and residents and Americans' right, Second Amendment rights. This is why we're so darn concerned. I appreciate the chairman having this hearing. With that, I got 38 seconds. I'd be happy to yield to the gentleman from Arizona.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. And I just want to ask that.
Chair now recognizes the chairman of Judiciary, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank all our witnesses for being here as well. It seems to me there are sort of two problems here. There's the fundamental problem, which is, you know, letting men compete against women in sports is just crazy. I love what Governor Huckabee Sanders said in response to the State of the Union. She said, the divide in America today is normal versus crazy. And this is one of those obvious divides. It is crazy to think it's okay to let guys compete against girls in sports. That is just a given. The whole country knows that. Anyone with common sense understands that. But I'm also more concerned, or maybe not more concerned, just as concerned, with what happens if you speak out against it, which is exactly what happened to Miss Russell. Because Miss Russell, my understanding is you had you coached what? Yeah. First you were a Division I athlete, is that right?
Yes, that's
Division
correct.
I lacrosse player, and then you coached for, I think, 20, if I read your thing, 27, 28 years you coached?
Yes.
So you're not just some rookie coming off the street. You've coached a long time. You've had all kinds of success, right? You've won awards. I think you run the national program at some other, not in the United States, but somewhere I read in your thing. Where do you run the national program?
The U.S. Virgin Islands.
So you're an accomplished coach, but because you said what was normal, you got fired. Is that right?
Because I said what was normal, it was not liked.
Yeah,
and I was canceled.
I shouldn't say fired. Yeah, you were canceled because you weren't allowed to coach anymore. They moved you somewhere else. I read your testimony last night. They moved you somewhere else in the athletic department or in the university at Oberlin. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, and I always tell people, don't think they won't come after you, because I don't think you're not some crazy right-wing conservative Republican, are you, Miss Russell? You're just a coach. In fact, you even used the term. What did you say? You're the hippie love coach? That's not exactly how you describe normally not how you describe Republicans. So this is your words. You've been nicknamed the hippie love coach. You work with all your student athletes, even I think you even said some who are transgender.
Yes, I've coached 3 transgender students. And in my support after I spoke out, I have had many gay men, many lesbians, and a group of transgender athletes and people who aren't athletes let me know that they support this. They support that women's sports should stay female only.
Yeah, and they were willing to confide in you because they trusted you. They knew you were a good coach. They knew you were there to help the student athlete. They understood that. They're willing to come, but that wasn't good enough. This is the part that is so frightening. It's never good enough for the left. It's always got to be every single thing they want, or we're coming after you. Even if you're the hippie love coach, they're coming after you. And that's what they did to you. I mean, this is how the left, this is how the cancel culture mob operates. It's a total attack. So this is bigger than, as bad as it is what Miss Gaines described, what she had to go through. And if I remember your story right, Miss Gaines, you won, but you weren't able to be #1 because of this Leah Thomas individual. You actually won. I mean, bad enough as that is, this attack on the First Amendment and your right to speak out against that is just as bad and just as scary, because that's across the board. And I tell people all the time, you have 5 liberties under the First Amendment. Your right to practice your faith, your right to assemble, your right to petition the government, free press, free speech. The most important one, by far, is your right to talk. Because if you can't talk, you can't practice your faith. You can't share your faith. You can't petition your government. And you spoke out against something that anyone with any common sense knows is ridiculous, and they came after you. That's why this panel, and Chairman, thank you for doing this. This panel and this subject is so darn important, because it's fundamental to who we are as a country. You can't have a country if you're only allowed to say what the left says is okay. And for people who stand up and defend that, they need to, Miss Goss-Graves, I don't know. I wasn't able to be here for all of this, but my guess is you're defending this idea that guys can compete against girls. Maybe not, I didn't hear it. But don't think they won't come after you at some point too. I mean, here's how bad the left is. The left, Dianne Feinstein, liberal, iconic senator for the left, wasn't even good enough for the left. It was the Dianne Feinstein Elementary School in San Francisco. They went back and found something she said 30 years ago, and they said, we got to rename the school. So no one is safe. If they can go after Miss Russell, 27 years coaching for saying something that everybody knows is true, then come after anybody. And that is a dangerous world to live in. I didn't mean to speak that long. I actually wanted to let you guys talk. And Miss Gaines or Miss Perry, if you want to say something, go right ahead.
I think what we're seeing is sort of this philosophical devolution on truth. We've gone from an ontological perspective on truth. Truth is truth, no matter how you feel, to a consequentialist approach on truth. Truth is truth so long as it doesn't hurt your feelings. The law doesn't care about feelings. The law is the law, so that we have a method of American constitutional governance. And Title IX and the Constitution are very cut and dry. It doesn't matter whose feelings are hurt. And if there are indeed less than 1% of individuals in the country who are transgender, as Representative Garcia mentioned, why the urgency from from the Biden Department of Education to suddenly upend 50 years of civil rights protections for biological women who benefit from Title IX. That is throwing the entire canon of civil rights law on its head.
Thank you all. Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Green for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And
Morning, Mr. Kiley.
I yield to the chair.
Mr. Kiley, the chair of the Judiciary Committee.
Oh, to the chair of the Judiciary Committee.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Kiley.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Ms. Clark, who's Ava Edel?
Chairman, that is not a name that I'm familiar with.
Well, I'll try to familiarize you with her. She's an 87-year-old pro-life advocate who survived a communist concentration camp in Yugoslavia after World War II that you guys have charged under the FACE Act for praying and singing in front of an abortion clinic. Is that the best use of the Justice Department's time and energy?
As noted, the FACE Act has been is a law that this body passed in response to efforts to obstruct access to reproductive health clinics, threats of violence, acts of violence. We follow the facts and apply the law without fear or favor, Chairman.
Really? I think we've heard a lot of that today about how if you're pro-life, you get the full treatment. Just ask Ava Edel, 87-year-old concentration camp survivor. But if you're on the other side, after the Dobbs decision, it's a different issue. In spite of what you've said, that you apply it equally across the board. How about your decision to file a lawsuit against SpaceX? Can you talk to me about that?
Yes, Chairman.
Let me ask it this way first. Did Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter have anything to do with the Justice Department's decision to file that lawsuit against SpaceX?
The investigation into SpaceX was open during the last administration, and we filed an administrative action under the Immigration and Nationality Act, an important law passed by this body with bipartisan support and signed into law by President Reagan.
So what are you alleging that SpaceX did wrong?
In this case, we allege that the company is not compliant with the anti-discrimination provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act. This is a law that has been—
Who are they discriminating against?
Here they are discriminating against people who have received refugee and asylum status by our federal courts under the INA.
They're discriminating against refugees and asylum seekers, is that right?
No, Chairman, against people who have received refugee status and asylum status by our federal courts and who enjoy equal standing under federal law to U.S. citizens and naturalized citizens. The law requires equal treatment of these individuals.
And you're saying that SpaceX did not hire, is that appropriate, did not hire enough refugees or people who've been granted asylum? Is that what you're asserting in the lawsuit?
And that they discourage those people from applying for any job, whether it's for a custodial position, office clerk, someone who works in a kitchen facility, all the way up through engineering.
So you're suing, I just want to cut to the chase. You're suing SpaceX because they hired too many Americans, too many citizens, not enough people who are refugees or people who've been granted asylum.
This investigation—
And you waited to sue. This investigation started 3 years ago. I know the facts. It started 3 years ago. And yet you bring the lawsuit after Mr. Musk purchases Twitter, now X. Is that right?
We apply the laws that this body gave us without fear or favor.
And Mr. Musk, his assertion is that they're dealing with national security type information at SpaceX, and that's why he's even posted this before you brought the lawsuit. He said this, that's why they focus on hiring people who have a green card or are American citizens. And you guys say, this is something we need to go after SpaceX because they're not hiring enough Americans, and we need to charge Ava Edel, 87-year-old concentration camp survivor. That's what the Justice Department and the Biden administration needs to do. But oh, by the way, we don't know anything about Missouri v. Biden. We didn't weigh in on The issue where a governor of a state told the citizens, they're American citizens, you cannot exercise your Second Amendment rights contrary to the law, contrary to what the Supreme Court has said, and you're trying to tell us today that the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department is not political. Frankly, I find it almost laughable that you're making that argument, because anyone with common sense and any objectivity can see you guys are definitely political. With that, I yield back and thank the gentleman who's left for yielding time.
Well, I thank the Judiciary Committee Chairman. I would like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a letter from Mr. Paul Teller, the Executive Director of Advancing American Freedom, to Attorney General Garland, Secretary Cardona, that is noting the significant spike in anti-Semitic vandalism, harassment, and violence across the United States, and asking the Department of Justice, Department of Education, who have expansive jurisdiction, particularly Civil Rights Division, over these matters, to ensure that they're following up on that is signed by numerous groups across the country. Without objection.